Board. For members of the public or press, my name is Alan Cowan. I'm the chair of the IGB in Inverclyde. Let me first of all thank members for attending today, and let me also welcome any members of the public or the media that are attending as observers. I always start with a standard statement. I'll do that now, that this meeting is being held remotely and will be filmed and recorded for live and subsequent broadcast available through the Council's website. The Integration Joint Board is a joint data controller with Inverclyde Council and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde under the General Data Protection Regulations and the Data Protection Act. This meeting will be broadcast and recorded to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. Data collected during this remote meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policies available through the Council website. Members of the Integration Joint Board are reminded that they should follow the IJB's established meeting protocol, including around the use of the chat facility, and that comments made in the chat facility are visible to all participants in the meeting, which may include members of the public or the media who have also received invites to the meeting. Thanks for allowing me to do that. It's rather wooden. So the purpose of the meeting today really is to deal with and consider items on the agenda. I would highlight perhaps to members 4 particular items I think of importance. The first is item 6, which is the conclusion of our work on our interim strategic plan. I think the next is probably item 7, which is a paper about our level of compliance with the Equality Act and the Equality Duty, quite an important paper. Paper 8 is a paper that follows on from a report that Kate gave us last month about the realignment of children's services, perhaps a more expansive explanation of what has gone on there, an opportunity perhaps to receive further assurance and ask questions. And then finally, I think the other significant paper is our budget paper at item 9, which is our 23-24 budget proposals. I would just say to members that for the budget paper, that is a decision paper. It's in the sort of noting area of the agenda. It's a paper for a decision. Can I also just ask members, I'd be quite keen if our colleagues from East Dun are on the call, that we take their paper early. I'm just looking at Diane, who's nodding, and I'm going to get Kate to know. I'm not sure if they're on the call yet. Maybe I'll just pause there.
Yeah.
They are on the call. So my proposal to members would be that we take the paper which is on the agenda, item 8, which is Specialist Children's Service. You just march that up the agenda and we take it after item 3. So we take it as item 4 and we drop everything else down. I'm sure members will be happy with that. It'll allow our colleagues to get back to, I guess, other important things that they need to do. So thank you for that. We'll take item 8 as item 4 and then we'll move on from there, just dropping everything down one. Let me, as always, thank the officers for preparing papers and for making themselves available for questions and challenge. Can I remind members about the meeting protocol, which Vicky kindly sent out again with the papers earlier last week. So it's just mute the mic until you're asked to speak or invited to speak. Please raise your hand or use a Q in the chat facility if that helps to indicate to me that you'd like to make a contribution. I'll do my best to stay abreast of both of those. I'll always take a bit of assistance from Vicky and others if I've missed some people, but if you use those facilities, that will be helpful. As always, please make your remarks in principle through the chair, so don't have a dialogue with each other, but address any remarks that you wish to make through the chair. With your help, I'd hope to get through this today. It's somewhere between 4 and 4:30. It's a difficult agenda to judge because there's not so many papers, but there are actually quite a few quite important papers which might lead to longer discussion. So I'm hoping we can conclude this by about 4:30. And on that basis, I'll offer you a short break about 2:15, 2:20, something like that. We can judge then whether we want to take it or if we've progressed quite well, whether you want to go on and finish. So around about 2:15 to 20, I'll pause for a short break. Maybe I just remind members of the public and the media that, of course, you are welcome. We enjoy seeing you here. But you do attend as observers, so it's really important that we don't take questions from you in this forum. We can do that in another place. And therefore, I'd ask you just to not use the chat function. And of course, as we use the hands up function, I just ask you not to use the hands up function as well. Finally, can I just assume that all members will have read or familiarised themselves with the papers? I know that's the norm. What I will do is just ask the sponsor of the paper to introduce the topic, give you a broad understanding of what the paper is about, point to the important aspects of the paper, and of course highlight the recommendations. And then at that point, I'll, as ever, move to members' questions and try to balance that across those that need to speak. As always, please allow me to try and judge when it's appropriate to move on. We do need to get through all the items. We want to make sure that every contributor that's produced a paper gets a fair amount of time to present their information and for us to look for the assurance that we need. So just allow me to move us on if you think it's when it's at that point in the discussion. So with that, let's move to item 1, which is apologies, substitutions and declarations. I'll take them one at a time. I have apologies from Stephen McClacken, from Laura Moore, who may join us later, but Laura Moore's an apology at this stage, Dr. Hector MacDonald and Gemma Erdley. I'm just going to pause to make sure that's complete and that nobody else has other apologies. Not Diane's given me a nod. There are no substitutions that I know of. And I'll now just say to members the normal declaration of interest. Can I just ask you to declare any interest in any of the papers that are on the agenda today? Any personal interest in any of the papers on the agenda today?
Chair, Councillor McCluskey has his hand up.
Thank you. Councillor McCluskey-Martin, please.
Thanks, Alan. I just want to declare just my normal declaration of a connection in relation to item 12, by virtue of a close family member being resident in one of the care homes mentioned, but it's the care home mentioned is only in there in terms of commentary and no action, so I don't think there's any issue with being involved in the discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I'll just leave that as it is, and of course, if we come to that item and you felt that we were being drawn into an area where you did have that conflict, you'd remind us then, and if we needed to, we might just ask you to sit out. But I thank you for doing that. I'm seeing another red dot. Let me just check this. I don't think there's anyone else. Yeah, and we're also noting Christina's standing declaration that she's the secretary of the board of the Carers Centre, so we make that one as well. That's what I was looking for. I knew that was there somewhere. Okay, with that in mind, let's move on then, if we may, to item 2, which is the minute of the last meeting, which was held on the 23rd of January. So a 7-page minute. Robert fortunately chaired on that occasion. I wasn't available. But I have proofread the minute when it came out. I'm sure Robert did too. Quite content with the discussion as much as it is. I wasn't at the meeting, but it seems to be framed in a way that is consistent with what we normally do. I'll just pause and ask members, first of all, if there are any issues of fact, accuracy, clarity or omission that we might need to note at this point in that minute. Any issues of fact, accuracy, clarity or omission? And then I'll go on to matters arising. Let's see that. I'm not seeing any, so I'm getting the sense that members are content with the minute as it's written. Are there any matters arising on the minute that aren't already covered in the agenda somewhere else today? Again, I'll just pause to see if there are any comments there. I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not seeing a red dot. So I'm going to take it that members are content with the minute from the last meeting on the 23rd of January. Thanks very much. That moves us nicely on to item 3, which is an item which Vicky is going to present, and it's about the non-voting membership of the IJB. Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief report, the purpose of which is to ask the IJB to agree the appointment of Margaret Tate as the new service user representative member of the IJB. Margaret will replace Hamish MacLeod, who recently resigned from the IJB. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Vicky. Any questions for Vicky on this standard item, which is the rotation of a member of the IJB? Questions for Vicky? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Vicky, is Margaret Tate on the call today, or is Hamish on the call?
Yes, Margaret's on the call. She's with Karen.
Okay, which is probably why I can't see her. She's sitting off to the side. Perhaps I can't see her. So there are obviously no comments then. So let me, on behalf of the board, thank Hamish for his contributions to the board over the period of time that he has been on the board. We're always most grateful for that. So maybe that could be reflected in a minute. And also, I would just like, on behalf of the board, to welcome Margaret Tate to that position. We look forward to your contributions as time goes on. So thank you, Margaret, for stepping up to do that. So with that in mind, are we happy to endorse the recommendation at 2-1? I'm getting the sense that we are. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to not the financial report. As I said, let's move on to the Specialist Children's Services Alignment Report, which is item 8 in the agenda. We're taking it at item 4. So before I can see Caroline's on the call. I've seen Caroline every time I've had this discussion in other forums, so you must be getting well used to this. I'm going to pause and ask Kate if she wants to put any context around this before we have a wider discussion. So I'll go to Kate first. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy that I canned it over to Jonathan, who has set out a briefing paper to cover some of the context. So just hand it over to Jonathan.
Sure. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. And as you've already stated, Chair, this item follows on from the Chief Officer's update at the January meeting of the IJB, advising of the management decision by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to realign specialist children's services within a single management arrangement and it's proposed that will be hosted within Eastern Bartonshire HSCP for Tier 3 services currently delegated across the Health Board area. The report and appendices provide further information on progress towards planning, and I would draw attention to 3.4 in the cover report, which outlines the main principles of local service provision continuing. However, as you've said, we are joined by Caroline Sinclair, Chief Officer of Eastern Bartonshire HSCP, as well as her colleagues Karen Lamb, Head of Specialist Children's Services, and Julie Metcalf, Clinical Director of CAMS within NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So with your agreement, Claire, Chair, I can pass over to Caroline at this point just to talk through the
Thanks,
paper.
Jonathan. Caroline, please go ahead. Thank you. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for taking this item earlier on your agenda, and thanks to Kate and Jonathan for briefing it in. So the report is provided to give information to members on the steps being taken to implement that single management structure for specialist children's services, which includes CAMS and community paediatric services. Within the board, it was agreed some time ago that a single management structure for these services would be preferable to the current dispersed arrangement, and that's because between the Tiers 3 and Tier 4 specialist children's services, there's actually a really complicated management and reporting structure with management of different bits of the service happening across multiple health and social care partnerships and in different places in the board for things that are not currently delegated to partnerships. And actually for what is realistically for a board the size of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, quite small and very specialist services with relatively small numbers of staff involved, that wasn't really creating the optimal arrangement that would support the services to continue to address what has been, and I'm sure you'll be well aware of it, notably a growing demand for specialist children's services input, including CAMS input, with referral numbers into that service now being higher in 2022 than they have been at any point in time since that data has been being captured, and there is nothing in the immediate horizon that suggests that demand for services is likely to fall away particularly quickly, given the context that children and young people have been living in, learning in, growing up in, and how complicated that has been for a period of time. So the intention behind the move to the single management structure is to maximise the service's ability to work flexibly, to be responsive to different levels of need in different areas, and to deploy its resources to children and young people who are most at need. And it's something that the Scottish Government are keen to see progressed, and we provide monthly updates to the policy team on our progress around that. But we do recognise then that any change of this nature to join things up in one direction, so the Tier 3 and 4 services across the whole board area becoming more joined up in one direction, it does run the risk of disconnecting it from very good work that has been happening in local areas, and we really know that would be a concern for members of the board. That's the reason why those 3 principles that Jonathan outlined that in the report have been established to ensure that we continue to maximise that local integrated working, because that development of services that continues to happen on the ground in the local area with the Tier 1 and Tier 2 services, with other important services in your area, primary care, other mental health services, education services, we know that continues to be essential to ensuring effective service delivery for children, young people and their families in its totality. So we are very much committed to making sure that continues to happen. So it is more or less a technical realignment of some line management elements of the service, rather than any intention to disconnect anything that happens locally from what is currently happening. So I hope that provides members with some assurance that has been considered. The change process is underpinned by a comprehensive work plan, which ensures that we take account of the need to continue to make sure that you will continue to have all the performance reporting that you would expect to see, and that there is staff engagement in that change and redesign process. So, Chair, I'll pause there. We are happy to take any questions. Myself, Karen, who's the General Manager of the service, and Julie, who's our Clinical Director, between us, I'm sure we'll be able to field anything that you might like to ask. Thank you.
Caroline, thanks for that expansion on the issue of the realignment. And Jonathan, thank you for producing the paper and giving us some context to get started. I've got a question from Councillor McCluskey-Martin.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Caroline, for introducing that. It all sounds sensible. I'm just wondering if a couple of questions for reassurance. In terms of the proposal, it looks like this would enhance resilience within the system. I'm just wondering, given that we just have, one, as it notes in the paper, one CAMS team operating in Inverclyde, is the intention that Inverclyde team will continue to just work in Inverclyde, or could we see, if there's increased demand in other parts of the service elsewhere in the health board area, could we see people redeployed to cover shortages elsewhere? Because I think, given the small team, I think we'd be nervous about that. So just some reassurance around that would be helpful. And then just also with regards to the ongoing discussions with staff, I'm just wondering if you could give a little bit more detail on what discussions have taken place with staff regarding the restructure, and also what engagement is taking place with any staff side unions regarding the restructure as well, and what the response has been on that front. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Who wants to respond, Caroline or Kate?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start, and then I'll invite Karen and Julie on bits that are really their lead. So yes, there's an absolute commitment that your local team continues to be your local team. It remains in place in your local area, continues to work with your local children, young people and their families. We do have across the Tier 3 and 4 services some slightly different management arrangements. I might invite Julie to talk about how the medics in particular work flexibly in response to changing demand. But you're absolutely right. The intention is that the service, the change enhances resilience of the service. So in as much as you would be concerned to see your staff depleted, that's absolutely not the intention. It is really about continuing to provide the whole system response across the whole area and in your local area specifically. So we've been quite clear with staff about that commitment, and with our staff side colleagues around that commitment. I'd maybe invite Karen to talk about how the work plan and the engagement with staff and staff side colleagues, and what discussions there have been to date, if that's okay, Chair.
Sure. Thank you. Karen.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks, Chair. So we have undertaken a programme of staff engagement across all HSCPs that's been led by myself and delivered in partnership with staff side. So there are 2 staff side representatives aligned to this programme, Marjorie Gochen and Susan Walker, and they have fully supported the engagement roadshows around the HSCPs. Also, we've invited local staff side representatives from each HSCP, and Diana, who's here today, has been along to some of our sessions as well. The general feedback from the sessions, which has taken the form of me presenting the principles and some of the rationale behind that, has been good, has been fine. Some concerns where potentially there are different arrangements for administrative staff have been highlighted for us, and again a particular arrangement in one HSCP around health for all teams. But on the whole, little concern being expressed by staff on the ground, and it has been the staff on the ground within the CAMS team and the community paediatric team that have been invited to each of the sessions.
Caroline, Karen, thanks for that. Martin, is that the assurance you were looking for?
Yeah, that all sounds good. Thank you for that.
I've got a question from Elizabeth Robertson. Councillor Robertson, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I've got 2 questions, if that's okay. The first question is really just thank you for the paper, and it is interesting to know the principles that are noted there about things still remaining local, but with a centralisation of line management. Can I just double check and ask, from a young person's journey perspective, what will be different from, so not staff, not clinicians, not anybody else, but taking a young person's journey, what will differ as this progresses from what they're experiencing now?
Why don't you ask your other question as well, Leslie?
And my second question is, obviously we know that there's been Scottish Government financial intervention at school level for sort of counselling and support for young people in that context, and I guess part of the aim of that was to make sure that people who are coming to CAMHS are the people who need to be at CAMHS rather than CAMHS being the only place for young people to be seen. And just while you're here, take the opportunity to say, are we seeing that working? Are we seeing that intervention making a difference in terms of presentations and referrals to CAMHS?
Thanks, Liz. I'll go first to Caroline.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for the questions. Yeah, the young person's journey should feel exactly the same. So they should still be receiving their service. They're still referred in the same way. They're still receiving their service by the local team. There are some slight behind the scenes changes about technical things like the routes by which any complaints about the service might be responded to. But from the experience of the young person receiving the service, it should be seamless. They should not see any difference at all. There's nothing that we are doing that as part of this that should affect that journey. So hopefully that provides some assurance on that point. In relation to the question about the investment there's been in the school counselling and how that's impacted CAMHS, I'll maybe start off and then perhaps invite our clinical director's view, but certainly we know that there has been great investment in all areas in school counselling, and I know that from what I've seen that those services are being well used and that children and young people are benefiting well from that. You're absolutely right. The intention was to ensure there was a range of different types of community services to avoid CAMHS becoming the only port of call. Sitting alongside that, though, is the fact that our CAMHS referrals continue to be at the highest rate that they have been. There is a sense, perhaps, that what the school counselling and the other Tier 1 and 2 community-based services is doing at the moment is picking up previously unmet need that hadn't actually made its way into CAMHS. That's not to say that at some point in the future, some of those children and young people may have journeyed then on into a CAMHS referral, but there is a bit of a sense around the teams that is currently filling an unmet need gap. Whether over time, as the Tier 1 and 2 services are more embedded and people begin to use them, and children and young people are also accessing school in a more normal way, in the way that they used to, and some of those things in their life are feeling more normal, whether we will then see a bit more of a drop off, I couldn't tell you, but it's not made an immediate reduction on the CAMHS referral rates at present. But if I may, Chair, invite Julia as our lead clinician to speak on that.
Thanks, Caroline. Please go ahead, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree with Caroline. I mean, to some extent, it's lovely that we have the school counselling and other services there, because I think Caroline's right. It is meeting a need that was previously unmet. I think probably there's a timescale issue, certainly before we see an impact on CAMHS as a specialist service around some of those early stage developments. So, as Caroline says, we're hoping in future that we will see a drop off of the children and young people who are coming to CAMHS services, but it's a question, really, I suppose, at this stage. The counselling services and other services that are there at early stages of a young person's journey are really welcome, and I think very much welcomed by young people, children and their families. But in terms of the impact on CAMHS, which is your question, I think we need to wait to see if there is a shift over time. We hope there is, I suppose, is probably best I can say at this stage.
So Caroline and Julie, thank you for those responses. I'll just check with Councillor Robertson that she's got nothing else. Liz?
Nothing else, thanks. I hope we do see a change in terms of the impact on CAMHS over time.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks again. I've got two further questions. One from Diana, then I'll go to Simon. Diana McCrone. Diana.
Hi, I did go to some of the presentations to the staff, and on the whole, the staff didn't raise an awful lot while the presentations are being given. I think they've since expressed some concerns to some of my other trade union colleagues. I know when the current structure was set up, you had a very small number of staff. For example, I think there were 7 OTs working in CAMHS to be spread out through 8 teams, and it ended up with people having to work across 2 or 3 different teams, which means you never really adjusted to one. And I can see the attractiveness in making the service more resilient by being able to get people to work more together and in a more sensible, joined up way there. But can you reassure the IJB that no one is going to be moved unless they volunteer to do so?
Sorry, I know that Kate was keen to get in, so I'm going to go to Kate first, and then I'll go to Caroline. Kate.
Sorry, Chair, can I suggest that Caroline answers this question?
Yep,
My
okay.
point, I've been waiting a wee while, and my point is to relate to an earlier point that Councillor McCluskey made.
We'll go to Caroline, come back to you later. Caroline, sorry about that. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to provide assurance that no staff will be moved unless anybody wishes to do so. Happy to provide assurance on that point. Thank you.
And on your wider point, Diana, are you? I mean, what I've heard already is that there is an engagement process still ongoing. So if there are concerns on the staff side, either by the staff side rep or individuals, I guess what I'm doing is checking that you're contributing to that process as it's running at the moment. So I'm really just waiting for a bit of feedback from you on that. Are you alert to the fact that the engagement process is open and you can feed in these concerns either to Caroline or one of our colleagues who's actually responsible for the engagement process with staff and staff side?
Yes, I'm happy to do that, and I know Marjorie and Susan very well, so
good.
We can communicate with.
Thank you. Just keen to make sure that that you're getting every opportunity you need to feed in that experience. I'm going to go back to Kate then, and then I'll go to Simon. Kate.
So at the point that this issue was mooted, and I think it was very early on me being into post, I think I went and met with the team in October, and the team our own Inverclyde team did express some concerns, but we were able to alleviate, because as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the way we work and how we deliver services, nothing's changed. That the team in themselves will be part of our integrated children's services approach and how we support children that experienced either harm, trauma or mental well-being, because there's a spectrum here, and we all know that our children coming in and out of these different services at different points. Just to pick up the point around seeing the difference, certainly in my previous post, we did chart the difference in terms of Tier 2 services, and we could see a direct correlation around a reduction in the amount of referrals or repeat presentations to GPs for a referral into CAMHS. It's quite difficult to track it because of the postcodes, but we were able to show that there was a 60% reduction over a period of 6 months. I suppose we've never charted it here, and each of the models across not Inverclyde, Greater Glasgow and Clyde for school counselling looks quite different. So we're in the process of actually recommissioning, that's a word, next year, our services for our Tier 2 support. So part of our learning and what we want is to look at what do we need. And I think that whilst at the time we were wedded to school counselling and it being identified around the school, I mean, experience has shown us coming out of the pandemic, when the pandemic happened, that was problematic, and that we need to look at that in a much more holistic community support that includes the family here, but isn't sitting at that the child hasn't been identified, have got severe and enduring mental health, because that is what CAMHS traditionally has been identified for, and we've brought too many children into that system to become disappointed, and the support that they actually need are probably long-standing support going through adolescence, and it would be community supports that would be at so we're keen to continue on that vein and to relook at it where we are in Inverclyde. The second issue is that we've got so much faith, even that it's centralised, that we're putting a new post into CAM that are going to be, as Karen knows, that are going to be supporting the disruptions that we have around our residential care homes, our fostering and our kinship care, so that we can actually have a post that works with our carers to be able to kind of manage some of the challenges that these children are experiencing as a result of complex trauma. And actually, this is a post that we're going to be looking to see how successful it is, and it's a watching brief. So I'm really feeling quite reassured about it. I think it's a great idea. If our psychiatrist went off, we would have difficulties. We're only having the one psychiatrist in that. And being in a team that had very little resilience for 8 years, I welcome the resilience. And I do believe that because it's still getting managed by an HSCP, particularly East Dun, that if we have any issues, that we're able to address them very quickly in terms of the delivery locally, because it is sitting within another health and social care partnership. So I just thought I'd kind of just provide a level of comment. And, you know, I have been pretty heavily involved with CAMS for over the last 8 years and would support this position.
Kate, thanks for that wider contribution. I think that'll help members just understand the breadth of this. I've got a final question from Simon. Simon.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentations. There's two questions. One relates to 6.2, where we talk about performance. Yeah, and I was interested. I think I've kind of touched on this before, yeah, and I'm wondering, the paper talks about refreshing the performance reporting, and I suppose I was anxious to make sure that we capture whether or not performance has changed, has improved, or has worsened as a result of these management changes, yeah. So I was just seeking, I suppose, assurance that we will try to capture that information, yeah. And my second point, and again, I think this came up at the Glasgow IJB or the board's finance planning performance meeting, is the case for streamlining and realigning is very persuasive. What I'm still not so sure about is why West Dumbarton, why East Dumbarton, why not Glasgow, and why not Inverclyde in terms of taking the lead on this. Okay? So those were my two questions, Alan. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So again, I'll go to Caroline first, because it'll be a downstream issue about how we can demonstrate that our performance has either stabilised or has gotten better. Hopefully we're not doing this to make it worse. So I'll go to Caroline first, maybe just some thoughts as to how she's hoping to be able to demonstrate performance from, I guess, last year's baseline. Caroline.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. Yes, performance is something you'll be well aware CAMS has had a considerable amount of scrutiny around its performance over recent periods of time, and performance has been improving, which is really great, and we are close to the national standard in terms of referral to treatment. What we are keen to do is to develop a slightly more comprehensive approach to the performance reporting. So at the moment, that's the thing that is counted and the thing that you are offered in terms of assurance of how services are performing. There's a lot that sits underneath that might be more about the outcomes for children and young people and the impact that the service has on outcomes, and things like and children and young people who perhaps choose not to attend or aren't attending, and what reasons sit behind that, and what because CAMS is a very broad umbrella term, but a bit more about kind of breaking that down a bit. So what is it that brings people to need this service, to be referred into the service? So there's work to develop the performance reporting suite so that it offers something that gives you some qualitative as well as quantitative, and particularly with that impact on what difference it makes to children and young people. Okay. So we will be continuing to work on that. There is a working group under the redesign proposals that is picking up this work. So hopefully that provides some assurance. Karen is our lead on that work. I wonder, before I come back to the second question, Chair, if you might like to use Karen.
Sure. Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that we're keen to strengthen is feedback from children, young people and families. We have already implemented a digital version of the experience of service questionnaire, and what we're planning to do is use some of that data that's given to teams already to be able to help us identify how we're doing and what our service users are suggesting we could improve on. And then a second thing, and Julie is leading on this, is an engagement with young people around attendance, as Caroline has alluded to, but also around what they want to be able to access in terms of what our services do. And we've had Sam H work with a large number of young people and families to help us get some information on that, and I'd like to feed that into performance reports as well as we move forward. So just a little bit more about the patient perspective there.
Karen, thanks. Before I move to Simon's second question, if I could just tie something down here. So how will the non-host HSCP, so the other 5, how will they receive a performance report? Have you gotten to the point of thinking about how the frequency of that and what that might look like? That might be helpful.
Yeah, so currently we provide from the Central Quality Improvement Team, each HSCP is already provided with a fairly comprehensive suite of reports, both for community paediatrics and CAMS, and that focuses a lot on waiting times, on activity. We also have from the Central Professional Leads and myself as strategic lead and the clinical directors, interface meetings with HSCPs, and those interface meetings happen quarterly at the minute, where we use those performance reports and have discussions about the concerns on either side or developments on either side. So we have those structures already in place. So we'll look to take feedback around, do we need to do that a little bit more frequently now as we move forward? And that's why reviewing the performance reports is helpful now in terms of what do you want to see, what do you want to hear from us in terms of how Inverclyde, the performance in relation to Inverclyde.
Karen, thanks. I think that's helpful. Simon's second question was about how we arrived at the choice of the host HSCP. And again, I'll go back to Caroline and maybe Kate if needs be. But I think Caroline probably has the best understanding of that. How did you end up with the job, Caroline?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it comes about because the board has allocated historically the role for oversight for the Tier 4 Specialist Children's Services to the Eastern Bartonshire Chief Officer. Before it wasn't delegated, so not to the partnership itself, but to the person who holds that post of Chief Officer of Eastern Bartonshire HSCP. So given that that is already allocated in that role, which I now hold, it felt sensible to the board that becomes the host for the rest of it as well when the Tier 3 is brought into that. So I've been responsible for, on behalf of the board, for the Tier 4 elements of the service since being in post. So this adds to that and joins up that alignment up and down the way.
Thanks, Carol. Let me just check with Simon that he's got the assurance he was looking for. Simon.
Yes, thank you. I did have a supplementary question about the performance reporting. When is that going to be in place? Have you got a timeline for that?
Yeah, go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, the performance, most of what Karen was describing there is already in place, and that we will work throughout the year to work on enhancing and developing that. So it's probably going to look for you in receiving it within your board as an iterative process. So we'll be adding new bits in as and when we are able to report them. But that suite of activity that Karen describes is what we currently do.
Thanks, Caroline. My final question from me, I'm looking at the recommendations. One of the things that caught my eye was the resource transfer, which is obvious in these circumstances. I didn't get a sense when I read the paper of when that was intended, whether there was a fixed time or you were still working through a process to get to an endpoint in order to transfer these services. So the question really is, do we know when this will go live and therefore when the resource transfers would take place? So there's a timeline around this. Yeah, of course, go ahead, Caroline. Thanks.
Thank you. So the intention is, and Craig will correct me if I'm wrong, but the financial transfer would take place from the outset of the new financial year, and it's contained within the budget papers that you will have before you for consideration later on. So it's a shifting of the roll forward budget, and then there may be some small pieces of due diligence that continue to be worked out in year, but those shouldn't be problematic. Have some small adjustments to be made as the year goes on.
Thanks, Caroline. So maybe to summarise, so really healthy discussion, some good challenge from members, strong responses. I've had lots of reassurance and assurance around the questions that were asked. It's a subject that is really, I guess, important, something that we shouldn't gloss over. It's also a management choice to align the services. So it's helpful that we get the assurance that we're seeking on the areas that we've asked questions. So can I thank Caroline and Karen and Julie for giving up some time today just to help us in this IJB really understand the breadth of this, to Kate for contributing a bit of wider thinking there, Jonathan for bringing the paper, and to my colleagues for asking questions. So I'm just left to say, are we content therefore to note the recommendation at 2-1? And I'm sure that we probably are. Thanks again, Caroline. I'm glad we could move you up the batting order so you can go back to work. So thanks again. If we can move on then, that takes us naturally to our financial monitoring report, which is now item 5, which is the update report from Craig. And it's the report on our financial position up to the end of December last year. So before I invite Craig to speak, I'll maybe just say that if he's not thought about it, it would be helpful as part of his discussion on the paper, which is up to December last year, if Craig just gives us a feeling for what movement, if any, there might have been since the paper, since the time frame in the paper. So we're into March, it's nearly 3 months forward. I'll just hand over to Craig, but looking for a wee bit of an update on where we are now rather than where we are in December. Craig.
Okay, thank you very much. As the paper says, it's up until the end of December. We're still working on period 11 side of things as we speak at the moment. So, but I've not had any scare stories from my finance manager around this yet. So I'm going on the basis that the figures are still pretty much in line with kind of where we're expecting it at the moment. So I'm happy to give that update at this moment in time. We're projecting an underspend of £1.3 million across the whole of the HSCP. This is predominantly in the social care side of things with the underspend, with a very minor overspend within the health side of things. Again, as we reported during the year, this is mainly due to vacancies within our overall system, and we also wanted to draw attention to the overspends within mental health inpatients and the prescribing overspends that were highlighted now. These have been offset by general vacancies within our total system. We continue to have underspends within our social care areas as well, predominantly in home care, which we've spoken about at length at previous IJBs. We also wanted to draw attention to the planned earmarking proposal in section 8.2 and the approval of the Transformation Fund bid in section 10. Based on the current projection, we are on track to have just over £17 million in reserves by year end, and this still maintains our position probably as recently as the last couple of weeks. The capital position is shown in section 11 and shows our progress against our current capital programme. That really hasn't changed very much, other than we know that the majority of the programmes that we have are still to happen with some of our bigger ticket items. For example, the LD Hub, which we've spoken about at length, and also a SWIFT programme, which is predominantly going to happen in the next year onwards. So quite a lot in the report, as always. I try to keep it as summarised as I possibly can, and as always, happy to take any questions anyone may have.
Thanks, Craig. So Craig's report is highlighting that we've got a modest underspend predicted in December, but he has no reason to doubt that that'll carry through to the end of this month, and has given you an indication of our reserve position, which has come down because we spent a lot of reserves in the last year. But from I'm looking at the figures that Craig mentioned, £17 million reserves at the end of the year, which is a position that not a lot of other IJBs will find themselves in. I'm looking for questions from members. I've got a question from Councillor McCluskey, then I'll move to one from Christina Boyd. Martin.
Thanks, Alan. Just on 2 sections of the report, I've just got a couple of questions and a comment. So firstly, obviously on the COVID funding, which has been long running and under discussion at this board, I think just to put on record, really thanks to you, Alan, for the robust letters that you sent to the Scottish Government about this. It's obviously a disappointing conclusion to it, but I think we've done everything we possibly could do in order to try and get clarity and retain those fundings, that funding. A question on it though is, have we actually received a response back to the letter that you sent to the health board about it? Because I wasn't sure if that one actually came back, but obviously the government one's enough on which to get clarity, but I was just wondering if the health board had replied. The second question was just on the mental health issue. Obviously we asked about this at the last board as well, and I'm just wondering, and there might be a reason for this, but I'm just wondering if we need to wait till, what the reason is that we need to wait till June to see the report that's currently in the rolling action log on Lang Hill and the Mental Welfare Commission, because obviously there's obviously ongoing issues with staffing that overlaps with that, and I'm wondering if there's any possibility, given that this has been coming up at kind of repeat meetings, whether we could have the report earlier than June, if that would be possible. That's all the questions for me. Thank you.
Okay, let me take the first question. So, Martin, thanks for those questions. So, without going backwards in this, because this has been a long-standing issue since September, of course, we did challenge, I did challenge on behalf of the board, the whole business of the COVID holding our underspends. There was precedent in the past for this. We've had an extensive exchange of letters, not only with the government, but also with, I also wrote to the chair of the IJB's group, who himself has representation with government. So it's not entirely closed, because that matter still runs on. But what's clear at the government level, certainly from DG Finance, is that there's no gap now between their understanding and ours. We have to return the money. In fact, I think Craig will tell us that the money's been accounted for in the transaction and the budget already, so being shorted by that amount. So we're kind of stuck with that. I did raise it verbally with the health board chair, but I haven't written to him. But I did take the opportunity to write to the chair of the national IJB's group, because he had an upcoming meeting with government, and he was keen to take not just our experience. I think we were leading the discussion. We put it on the table, if you like, but he was keen to understand the impact in the other HSCPs, IJB world, who maybe weren't making such a song and dance about it. So that's where I left it. It was very much with a yet unconcluded discussion at government level with the chair of the IJB's group, and I'm happy to go back and now close that loop with them informally, and I'll let you know what the outcome of that is. I wouldn't want to give you any false hope here, because I don't think there is any. I think the government's quite hard over here. I think what I was hoping that he might be able to do was to make it clear to government where they want to pass through, for example, pay, which seems to be a very obvious example, that it should continue to pass through the process. There may be other reasons why local authorities want to use the latitude they've got to balance their own budget, and I think we'd have to take a pragmatic view of that. But in this case, I think the intent of government was for pay to pass through, and it didn't. And I was trying to make the point that government therefore needs to be much clearer in future settlements so that this doesn't become an outcome. But it's not yet concluded. I will take that as a personal chair's action to go back and find out from Peter, the chair of the IJB's group, what came of his discussion with government. Martin, on the Lang Hill issue, who wants to pick that up? Craig, Kate.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the papers, Councillor McCluskey. What point are you relating to in terms of the mental health?
Sorry, Kate. So it's a couple of things linking together. So in the minute of the last meeting, we were asking about, it's basically the same question, which is we've got the underspend in mental health because of the need to increase staffing, and also because of the shortages. But there's also an outstanding action, which I think overlaps because it's about staffing issues. There's an outstanding action from the September IJB, which I think was for us to have a kind of deeper dive and some assurance around the Lang Hill Clinic more generally off the back of the Mental Welfare Commission reports. So I'm just wondering if these two things are, I suppose it's an open question, if these two things are linked. Like, we've got this overspend because of staffing, we've got this report that I think we asked for in September that I think is currently scheduled for the June meeting, and just because this kind of keeps coming up in the through the financial reporting. I'm just wondering if it's something that we could move forward.
So if I just give you an update, obviously I had a discussion with the Chief Executive of NHS, particularly around the overspend in the Mental Health Board. And there is work ongoing about system-wide resilience and very similar to the CAMS discussion about where it needs to sit and what that needs to look like. And at this moment in time, they have still not found a model that they believe that is clinically viable, and that we have to continue to cover the risks within that unit and provide the staffing. So that is a huge challenge for staff, but we will have to prioritise that for the event, because we can't have unsafe staffing within the unit. And we've got a variety of level of need within the unit, so we need to respond because of the emergency admission, because it is obviously an emergency admission unit too. The second point is around the mental welfare. That report was put to the IGB and it reflected on Glasgow and ourselves. We've had a subsequent mental welfare commission visit. I think it was only last month, might be 6 weeks ago, and we got a clean bill of health. So it might be useful for the IGB if we were able to. I don't think the report has been published as yet. So as soon as we get the report in, the feedback from Carol Fitzharris is that we did very well despite some of the challenges that were actually experienced. So there isn't a whole load of concerns. The issues that they were picked up is more about the environment, and that was fair dues because there's outstanding works that are required for that unit, but it wasn't of any level of concern, if that reassures you. And some of it was about choice of activities, some debate over a pool table, but quite minor issues and nothing really that we were concerned about. But I've seen Gail had put her hand up and put it back down. I don't know if I've missed anything there, Gail. Gail's the interim head of mental health and addictions and homelessness, just for everyone's information.
I'm not seeing Gail's hand. Let me go back to Martin's second point. When we come to the rolling action list, we don't have a huge number of roll-over reports in our May IGB, so I might just give you the next 5 or 10 minutes to mull this over in your head before we get to it. It makes some sense to me because that's so in the rolling action list, the Lang Hill report, which does date back from September, I think we could naturally pull that forward to May, but I'll give you a chance to think about that as we're going along, and we'll raise it at the rolling action list level. That Martin's other point was whether we could advance that report by one IGB so we could get that discussion cleared and any actions that fell out of it. So I'll just leave that hanging. We'll come back to it at the rolling action list when we see that. There seems to me to be scope there that we could do that, but we'll have the discussion then. Subject to anything that Gail wanted to say, I'm not seeing anything, and your hand's still up, Kate. I presume you want to just take it down. I'm going to move on to Christina, and then I'll go to Diana. Christina.
Just two things. First of all, I really wanted to pick up on Martin's comment about the long COVID money. Well, I mean, we accept the COVID money's gone, but Inverclyde at one point was the COVID capital of Scotland. So although COVID might be officially gone, we have a number of people with long COVID still, and you don't have to go that far to find them. Now, these people are accessing their GP, they need physiotherapy, they need various other things. So that's an additional burden that we have to bear because of long COVID, but we're not getting any money for it. And I think that's profoundly unfair just to say the thing's over, but I accept that we're not probably going to get anywhere with that. The other thing I just wanted to ask, it just happened to be something that caught my eye as I was going through it. On page 28, criminal justice, there's a 79% variance on it. Now, it's a small amount in terms of money, but I was just wondering why we had such a big variance. My recollection about criminal justice was at one point our budget was cut because instead of the budget being allocated according to the need in the area, it was allocated according to the amount of population that you had or something like that. So I was just wondering, is there a specific reason why there is such a big variance in criminal justice?
Thanks, Christina. I'll go to Craig and maybe pick that point up first and we'll work backwards towards COVID. Maybe pick that up.
More than happy enough to pick up that point. Criminal justice has shown that position at the moment because we are still due to get money in at year end for that. There's a particular package of care which we will not know the full funding at and towards the end of this, as we move into the year end position and that, so there is still money to come in there, and that's been the case for a number of years. So that position will move by our final accounts. We don't have that figure yet, so I can't put it in the accounts at the moment.
And Craig, the other point, which I'm not sure there's the response around the COVID and the long COVID, my understanding of the COVID funding is that it's all taken into core now. But again, I'll defer to Craig as to how we're supposed to deal with any issues of demand on our services that's related to COVID type activity. I'll go back to Craig.
Regarding the COVID side of things, we do not have any additional funding. I think Marie might want to come in for a very small amount here, but regarding the bigger stuff in the COVID, as far as I'm concerned, we have no other funding in that. But Marie, I think you were going to say there was maybe a small amount coming in, but it was very small.
Yeah, I was just having a look there to see if I could find the allocation letter, but I can't find the email at this point in time, unfortunately. There is a small amount has been allocated to the health board, and I want to say it's around 80,000, but I can certainly get that information to you. But it isn't certainly in relation to long COVID and about seeing long COVID patients as well.
That might be helpful for the minute. I know we might not tie it down today, but Marie, if you're able to give a bit of a definitive steer to Diane when you're producing the minute, that would probably be helpful, and it would address the point that Christina's made. It's not a huge amount of money, but I think the government's position was that we now need to be absorbing the ongoing costs into our core budget areas. Not popular, but that's the government's position. I saw Anne was waving at me before I went to Diana. I'm just going to check that Anne Cameron Burns didn't want to make a contribution that was relevant to this discussion. Anne. I'm not hearing anything. Let's move on then to Diana. We'll come back to Anne. Diana, you had a question.
Can I just say, with regard to long COVID, the health board's setting up a long COVID team of allied health professionals, physios and OTs in particular. They've recruited the first staff already, and this is a team that'll take non-complex long COVID cases from GP referrals. And the second place they're going to roll this out in after one sector in Glasgow is Inverclyde. And that is based on the question of need. So just to tell Christina that. What I was going to ask was the underspend that we've got has been due to staff vacancies. We had a staff partnership forum on Friday, and my colleagues from the council are saying it is taking so long to recruit and fill posts that people are being offered jobs and leaving before they're actually in place. And we were very keen to speed this up, and I'm hoping that given the level of underspend on vacancies, that this isn't going to be a deliberate policy. The trade unions are asking to meet with HR from both NHS and the council about the length of time it's taking to see if we can speed it up, given that sort of senior jobs appear to have the luxury of an overlap between posts, whereas other people, you have to wait for at least 3 months before you can fill a vacancy. So I just hope that this underspend due to vacancies isn't going to become a policy.
Thanks, Diana. Let me just add to that, and then maybe I'll portion that to somebody to respond. One of the questions that I had, which I'll put on the table now, were from the transformation funding, and I noticed there's a whole range of posts there, Craig, for which I'm not clear how well we're making progress. So for example, it gets to Diana's point about the length of time to get people recruited. There's a planning and design support officer post at 131k. There's 5 temporary social workers, about 180k. Those were the questions I was going to raise anyway, but they kind of dovetail with what Dan had said. Can you say something about how long it seems to be taking for us to get some what appear to be core staff recruited, and the challenging circumstances perhaps that we're having to fish in to get staff? So that's to Craig.
In terms of how I would need to speak to HR around that, because I don't know how long that's taking on that side of things, but we can certainly come back on that. Sorry, can I ask what was the question around against transformation fund? I wasn't really.
So in appendix, the transformation appendix that you've got, I think is at 6. It's on page 33, Craig, for convenience. So there are a range of transformation projects and things there. Some of those are posts to be recruited. And you've already, I think, just alluded to this. My sense was we seem to be taking a long time to recruit some of these key individuals into our organisation. So maybe it is a go away and perhaps give assurance at a future time as to how we're managing to recruit or not these folks. It does seem that these, in the transformation template, they seem to sit on there for a long time. We're not making much progress. The question I had to myself was, what progress are we making with these posts? It doesn't feel like we're making much progress.
I don't know if Kate, you want to come in on the individual posts. It would be difficult for me to answer them because they're not necessarily in my areas, but I'm more than happy if other heads of service or Kate want to come in around the individual recruitment areas.
Let's, of course, go to Kate. Kate, please.
Okay, so we have got complicated processes for HR. Okay, there's no getting away with it, okay, in comparison to my previous experience. And that's something that we're hoping to address through time with our council colleagues. And the way that we have to ask when it's permanent process, we have to go to council to get them approved. So there's a duplication of processes that we need to go through. Second point is about the transformation board. That we need to tidy up the expenditure in the transformation board. The 5 social work social workers were replaced by 5 social workers because we couldn't recruit social workers. And so that needs to be tidied up there, and I don't know if it's reflecting social work assistants. We also need to say that it's definitely not intentional to drag vacancies. It's of no interest to drag vacancies. We're already building it within our budget projections around turnover. So we will be doing that, but not as a deliberate strategy to bring in income. And can I just say to you, because of our transformation, our scheme, and we're the only one in Scotland that still has done it, so I have to thank the IGB, that Children's Services will be fully staffed in July because our incentive scheme for master's students has worked. So we have been able to fill all the posts with high calibre master's students. Now the proof of it will become. But genuinely, other people have offered them contracts at this stage and they've declined because of the offer of support. And we're having National Social Work Day is tomorrow, and we've invited all of these students along to see how we work in partnership across the bit of Inverclyde, because it is more than money. It's about the level of support that we provide them at the very beginning of their career. So that's part and parcel of them seeing about the relationships and how we work with relationships. So we will tidy up the transformation plan to reflect that, but I'm less worried than I would have been about 4 months ago.
Thanks. That's a good news story on recruitment on which to sort of draw the threads on this. There's 2 more questions, I think. I see Christina wants to get in, but I'm just going to go to a colleague. Is it Gail? She hasn't got her name. Is it Gail? Kilban EG. I'm sorry, I don't know you well enough. Who is that? Help me, somebody. You've got your hand up and had it for a while. Just taking it back down and you're now on mute. Okay, we'll go to Christina. And then I see Craig wants to get in. I would like to draw this to a conclusion. It's not a contentious area. Christina.
I would just like to thank Diane for that update she gave. I've just got another couple of points. If we're setting up a team for long COVID, is it NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde that are paying for it? Are we contributing to it? And if we are recruiting people, are we recruiting people, for instance, from our IJB, which then raises an issue of how do we backfill those posts? Because we could be like robbing Peter to pay Paul, in effect. And the other issue, I think, is how do we actually measure the need and how people come forward for this, so that we know that we are capturing the people who are coming forward for long COVID and that we're not missing them?
Kate, do you want to pick that one up? You're on mute.
This is relatively just off the press. So we don't have a great deal of detail, and it will be worked out through the application within the City of Glasgow. I've not had any requests for the HSEB to be paying for this post, and it is the HSEP, not the IGB, in terms of where we would recruit from. But we can't stop if people are interested in moving into the long COVID team. We can't really stop that, but that would be an issue system-wide, Christina, and we would hope that central HR, which they are very good at, would manage the impact for any of us.
Let me ask Craig as well, who's got his hand up. We'll try and draw stumps. Craig.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. I suppose it was just to give you a wee bit of reassurance around the Transformation Fund. Now I'm actually getting a chance to actually read some of the details here. But the biggest figure we have there is under the Swift Replacement Project, which is just under £500,000. And I'm pleased to say that the recruitment for those particular posts are well underway. That covers across a number of different areas within HSCP. Some of it's fairly straightforward in terms of it's been additional hours for people moving forward, but that takes up the vast majority, or a good large chunk of the money that we've got in Transformation Fund, and they are well underway with the recruitment of those posts. So it's just to give you a wee bit of reassurance around that side of it.
Thanks, Craig. I want to give the final word to Gail Kilbane, who had a comment she wanted to make. Just put it in the chat now. Gail. Sorry.
Thank you, Ellen.
Karen, my apologies, Karen.
No, it's Gail.
Is it? I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here between folk in the chat. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay, so Alan, I'm interim head of mental health. I just wanted to say from the very, very early point in the budget, as brand new into the post, I've already arranged meetings with all the professional leads around the mental health budget, and obviously looking at where their staffing pressures are. But I think in relation to the Lang Hill Clinic report, a bit of reassurance that there's been some movement around in terms of where the or some of the specialist posts around OT and things, to make sure there's activity within the service. So that was probably one of the things, but I'm happy for us to bring that update to the IGB in May as requested.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So
let's draw stumps. Quite a lengthy conversation on our budget position at the end of December. I accept that for many COVID is a concern. I don't very much diminish that for a minute, but we did get a bit sidetracked in our budget discussion about COVID, maybe because of some of the resource issues, which I accept. Can I just ask members, are we therefore content to note the recommendations on our budget position at the end of December? They're outlined at 2.1 on page 16 of the paper copy, and they're the standard recommendations that we get at each financial report. Are members content to note those and accept them? I guess we are. Thanks very much. Let us move on. I'm conscious that we do want to try and finish by 4:30. Let me challenge you. I would like to take the rolling action list, and if we could, maybe even go through the strategic plan before we break. So let's go now to what is now item 6, the rolling action list. Again, I'll just ask Kate maybe to speak briefly to this. I don't think there's a need to go through all of it. There may be some observations that members want to make, but I'll just throw it back to Kate, maybe just to highlight some of the work that they've done to reframe the rolling action list, and also to show us what's coming up for the rest of the year, which is a discussion we had offline. Kate.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my papers. Okay, right, let's start again because I've been jumping about. Item 6. Let's see, page 41. Good. Item 5. Right, okay.
So, Kate, I don't think there's any need to go through it line by line.
No.
They'll have done it themselves. Maybe just point out anything you think might be important. It looks to me there's a few updates and changes that aren't quite right, but go ahead.
Right, okay. One of the things I would say that the IGB agenda in May is absolute chocker. So I think that we would want to pick that up within our next catch-up, Chair. So that would be the first thing that I would comment on. And the June meeting, which we looked at this morning, continues to be a bit challenging too. So that's all I'm really going to say about that, because these bits and pieces that are on this agenda are pretty meaty and will take a bit of time. Craig, I don't know if you want to add anything on to this.
No, I think it's probably just to reiterate what you've said, Kate, that there's a lot of stuff on here that needs to be done in the next 3 and 4 months. So we're happy to have that conversation with the chair when we meet maybe next week, if that's okay.
Okay, so let's do that then. Let's make sure that when we come to our 12 to 12:45 that we come with a, you know, a proposal, I guess, or something worked up rather than start from a ground base. So I'll leave that to you. Members' questions before we move on the rolling action list. Anybody want to make any comments or observations about the action list? I'm not seeing any hands. I'm seeing a lot of folk. Martin, Councillor Plisky.
Sorry, just for clarification, I noticed Gail said May, but are we saying not May, or are we saying you're going to pick that up at your catch-up, just so that we're clear?
So we're going back, Kate, to the discussion about Lang Hill. It certainly looked to be, when I looked at our forward look, which is what Martin's talking about, that we had a thin-looking May, and we also had a desire to take that Lang Hill report early. Something that Gail had just said she'd be happy to bring it in May. So let's make sure that when we meet next week, that part of our discussion is it will be the reason why we're not doing that in May, rather than the reason why we are doing it in June. So we'll assume that we're going to bring it forward at this stage, because that's what Gail had said. She was quite content to do that, and there seemed to be a demand for it to move up by 1 IGB. And if we could, let's have a good look at it perhaps offline next week. Happy to do that. If there are no other members' questions, thank you very much. Let's move on and we'll go straight to item 7, which is the final update on our interim strategic plan. It brings to a conclusion a lot of work that's been done this year to bridge us into 31st of March next year. Grateful for all the work that's been done. I suspect most of it coordinated by Andrina. Again, I'll go to Kate if she wants to make a comment, or Craig, and then perhaps, I guess, the action officer might be, I'm guessing it might be Andrina. But Kate, anything you want to say about the strategic plan?
Just to thank the team for the work that they've done. They've taken the 6 big actions, which was a very weighty document, and tried to review where we are, bearing in mind that it was a 5-year plan. No one anticipated that the construct of writing a plan, that we were going to have a pandemic, and then kind of made it proportionate around trying to identify what our priorities are, whilst putting an outcomes framework that will look at some of the performance and the measures of success. So I would just like to thank Angina and Pam, who's not here today, with some of the service managers who have contributed to this. So I'll just kind of hand it over to Angina now. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah,
okay,
thanks,
Kate. Thank you, Chair. I will try and keep this brief. I'm conscious it's quite a weighty paper. So as the IJB board are aware, we did start off in 2019 with a 5-year plan, which should have taken us to 2024. As already pointed out, we've had a pandemic, and at that point we moved into a transition plan, which we have in effect rolled over until this point. It was also agreed that we would refresh the strategic plan halfway through the 5 years. We've just kind of flipped that time scale slightly, but we are now bringing to you the refreshed 2019-24 plan for the final year of that plan. In your papers today, you will find the final monitoring report of the transition plan, which outlines the actions and the key deliverables that we've been working on over the last kind of couple of years, and that closes off that transition plan. You will have the refreshed strategic plan, which is very much a refresh of what we had before. As has already been pointed out, we've maintained our 6 big actions, and we did that on advice from our communities, particularly working with Your Voice, Caver Centre, CVS, who advised us that the communities liked the 6 big actions and they understood them. So we really kept with that, and our consultation that we undertook last year has all been based around that. So you have the updated plan, you have a number of key deliverables, some of which are very similar to what were in the previous plan. Some of them will be new key deliverables that have come on stream since then. And then really to try and pull all of this together, when we took this paper to the Health Board, when we took it to the Scrutiny Panel and the Council, and when we had the development session back in September with the IJB Board, everybody seemed fairly happy with the plan, but wanted to see the outcomes framework that would sit alongside all of this. So the third appendix that you've got today is really our basis of what we're calling our outcomes framework. And what that is doing is it's got the 6 big actions with the key deliverables contained with it. And then what we've tried to do is set out a number of progress measures or key indicators that will show our progress against each of those 6 big actions. However, to add to it, to make it complete, we've also added into our outcomes framework the national integration indicators and the MSG framework, which are the 2 key areas that we need to report back to the Scottish Government as tied in with the national outcomes. And then we've also tied into our outcomes framework the local government benchmarking framework and the key indicators that relate to social work and social care. And what we've tried to do is bring all of that together to what we are now calling our overarching outcomes framework. Going forward, our annual performance report will be reported against our outcomes framework. And as per the feedback that we got from the internal audit report that was undertaken of our strategic plan, we will tie together our progress on our actual strategic plan, 6 big actions, and our outcomes framework together into one report rather than having separate reports going forward. Following on from that, we have always wanted to ensure that the IJB was seeing more performance data. So as part of the audit, we have the commitment now that we will bring on a 6 monthly basis, a performance report to the IJB, so that you've got much greater oversight of performance in terms of how we're performing. I'm not going to go through any of the detail within it. I'm quite sure you've all had the opportunity to read it. Hoping that you are satisfied that this starts to move in the right direction. I don't think we're 100% there yet, but I think in terms of the direction of travel of trying to bring together strategic planning and performance monitoring together, we're taking the right steps. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sandrina. Before I move to questions, I'll just remind members that the investment that we've made in this, if you like, final year of bridging plan, I'm hoping, and maybe Andrina can speak to this if it comes up later, but I'm hoping that the investment in time and effort that we've put in this year gives us a good push for the next 5-year plan, and that much of what we needed to do this year forms a skeleton or the outline of what we might be doing in future years. So just hold on to that thought as we move down the timeline, that we might see improvements to this as we go into the next phase, which starts April next year. Questions from board members. I've got a question from Christina, then one from Elizabeth, then I'll go to Simon. Christina.
Thanks for this, Andrina. I know it's been a lot of work and it reads really well. There's just one particular entry that I've got a question on. On page 52, 1.4, it talks about the delivery of the RISE project, and it says we're progressing with an additional 14 young men workers. Why are there so many male workers? Are there any female ones? Is it just that the female ones haven't been mentioned?
I'm happy to take that question, or if Kate wants to. That particular project, the RISE project, which was funded through the anti-poverty, was specifically targeting young men, Christina, within the Central Greenock area to begin with, and then it would be broadened out, but it was young men it was targeted at. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Kate. I think your time was up.
No, I think Andrina has just outlined that. We're clear that it needs to apply across. So that'll be our next iteration of how we want to take RISE. And we're keen to extend the funding. The funding is only up to November 2023, but we are seeing some measure, some indication of good outcomes, bearing in mind that these are probably the most complex individuals that we work with across the Health and Social Care Partnership. but we would be extending it out to look at primarily, and it so happens that most of the individuals come from the justice system too, so we certainly do pick up very complex women that are in the justice system, just to reassure you.
Thanks, Kate. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this. It's fantastic to see this here in all the detail that we've gone into. I think it is great that we've kept the 6 big actions. The comment that I've got is particularly in relation to the outcome framework, which is also really useful to see included as a part of the suite of documents around the strategic plan. I am still worried, and I know I sound like a broken record about this type of thing. I'm still worried that some of the indicators that we've got are output indicators, or actually indicators of input of our services, rather than outcomes. And rather than changing any of them, I'm going to look at Big Action 1 as an example. There's 6 indicators there: number of referrals to primary care, community link workers. And rather than just measuring that, it's then taking it to the next step and saying, and this means that, and the outcome of this is that. So it's kind of almost saying, having measured that one thing, what is the kind of story behind it? What's the impact from it? Because I think we are still going to be missing a trick if all we do is measure the number of referrals to, number of new and returning services users to, number of payments made, etc. I think that's still only half of the story, but it is absolutely going in the right direction. And I think my plea would just be that in the reporting of it, it would be take it to the next step, and we've done this, we've made the payment and this has resulted in, or we've made the referrals and this has resulted in, and report it to us that way. But that's me being a broken record. I'm fully aware.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A valid point to make. It's a point that I would have made as well. It was on my list. We've talked before about how difficult it is to frame an outcome in a way that is achievable, realistic, time-bounded. It's a challenging area, but you're right to highlight that, which is why I said at the start, I hope that we can use this as the framework for moving on to better. So Kate wanted to just comment on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And Gina unfortunately was off for some of the time that I had the opportunity to speak to the team about it, and it is inputs or its process. But actually, the fact that we're aligning it to big actions is a start of the journey, Elizabeth, and I believe that we could easily then turn the inputs in the process, and they're generally inputs, and there is one output actually, that into an outcome, but we do not have the measurement within our system to do that. So we're going to have to think how we're going to measure that impact, and what systems do we have to pick up to do that, because that will require us to do additional work. And I don't think we were at the stage, at the point of putting together this outcomes framework, because we did need it to do that, but we're hoping that that will be part of what Angina and the team will do with the data analysts that is within the service.
Elizabeth, your hand's still up.
It's just to kind of come back in. I think that's really helpful. I just kind of feel that sometimes when we're looking at outcomes, it's hard to find a measure, it's hard to find a figure. But what we do have is we've got really good access to people who are impacted by the inputs and the outputs that are brought upon them or brought to bear on them. And actually, so again, looking at Big Action 1 as an example, indicator 6, number of cost of living support payments made. It's only telling you how much money's going out the door, but we then know who the money's going to, and we can ask the people, what difference has that made to your life and the quality of information, rather than just always having to go for very difficult to find hard numbers at times. Can really tell the story. I go back to a report that I did in a former life to the Scottish Executive, and what they said in the report when they read the report was it made the hairs in the back of our neck stand up. And I think that's what we should do with all the reporting that we do when we're trying to make an impact in people's lives, is when people read the reports, it should make the hair in the back of their neck stand up, because they can see that there's real change in people's lives.
We're all agreed that outcomes are important. We're all agreed that in the next iteration, a large focus of our work will be to see how much we can improve both the description and the challenge around outcomes, challenge ourselves to describe an outcome in a way that holds us to account, and we'll have that discussion, I guess, as we go. Let's move on. I do want to move on to other questions. So Simon and Martin both would like to have questions. So Simon.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much to you, Andrina, and the team. I shared Elizabeth's view. I mean, I think the approach is really good. Yeah, I like the big action approach. Yeah, but across the system, we're not very good at reporting on outcomes. We're dead good at reporting on inputs and processes, but not on the impact of making. So I'd welcome a refocus on that. I've got a techie question and then a question about a service. Yeah, and the techie question is when we did this refresh, Andrina, did we work with the strategic planning group, or was this something done out with the strategic planning group?
I'm happy to come in and answer that at a time. Yes, it was done with the strategic planning group, done with some of our key partners. Our consultation in particular was done through Your Voice and CVS. We did wider consultation with communication and engagement groups, and that all got fed back to the strategic planning group at that point. Obviously, the delay in terms of bringing here to add the outcomes framework, we've just recently been to the strategic planning group with the outcomes framework, so that was a new bit for them as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And my second kind of service question is about Big Action 5. Yeah, and indicator number 5, or one of the big action, was to increase the access to residential rehab for people who misuse alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Yeah, but I didn't see in the narrative, any mention of it, Andrina. Yeah. So in the narrative, we talk about building recovery communities. We talk about implementing the recovery service, but I see nothing about increasing access to residential rehab. Is that because we've dropped that?
No, actually, it's probably more because it's fairly new in terms of the Scottish Government direction, in terms of ensuring that people who require access to residential treatments have access to them, and that's some of the work that the Alcohol and Drug Partnership are doing in terms of taking that forward. So it's probably more because it's kind of fairly new that's come in.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Martin, Councillor McCluskey.
Thanks, Alan. Just reflect what other people said. A really great piece of work. Thank you for putting it together. I think my question maybe slightly overlaps with Elizabeth's, but is possibly more in the space of like the assurance information we get than where Elizabeth was, and it's kind of linked to 2 points. One is whether I think in the next stage of the next strategic plan, whether it might be something that we might look to do as a board and ask ourselves a little, like Alan will know that we're both on a group for the health board at the moment doing this, where we're looking at the assurance information that's provided to us. And I think there's an overlap in terms of these outcomes. These are obviously also the indicators that we will be using as a board to kind of assure ourselves that things are ticking over in the way that they should be. So I'm just wondering if, looking into the future, we maybe need a group that's made up of a working group made up of officers and board members to actually look at the outputs, so that from a board member's point of view, we can look at them from the perspective of the indicators providing us with some kind of with a level of assurance which we will be happy with in the future. And the second point, kind of related but more immediate to this, is I'm just wondering why we're just going for 6 monthly reports in terms of governance, and especially given that we're putting Pentana into place as part of this. I'm wondering why we wouldn't get more regular updates against these indicators, and why actually we wouldn't get these indicators at every IJB meeting, if not every single one of them, like a dashboard that would enable us to actually ask some questions and assure ourselves about the delivery of the strategy at each IJB. But I would appreciate some more, just get some clarity on why it's just every 6 months. Thank you.
Did you want to pick those up, Andrina?
I'll probably give you a fairly short answer to that. At the moment, we don't have Pentana up and running. At the moment, the focus of the team I will be honest to say, is on the implementation of Eclipse, which is our new case management system. And obviously we want to make sure that we've got the right focus on that. The plan is to get as much of this onto Pentana over the next few months as possible. I would hope at that point that we will be in a position to bring more regular reporting. I think now we've kind of got this framework, it will be much easier to give you what I would call a scorecard approach, which will be able to show that, and that is something that I would like to bring more regularly. I think just going back to some of the conversation, absolutely this is the start of our journey for us. Previously, we have always had our strategic plan monitoring separate from our performance monitoring. And this, for me, is the start of trying to pull all this together. So whilst some of this is about indicators and about numbers, I'm really hoping that in our annual performance report, I want to do it slightly differently and really pull out the 6 big actions and go into some of the detail that you've already pulled out, particularly Councillor Robertson, about, well, what, yes, we've given out, 100 payments, but actually what's been the real impact of that on a community or on a person. And I think that's where we can really start to mature our thinking around all of this. So yes, to all of the points that you've been raising, I would really hope that we would get to that stage down the line.
Martin?
No, I'm happy with that. I'm just wondering, Alan, this might be something further down the line. If we're introducing Pentana, if we've got questions about the indicators, whether that small group at some point further down the line might be something we might want to think about. Just if we're having a big change in the way that we're delivering this information anyway.
Sure. The only thing I can add to that as the chair with the experience I've got is that the strategic planning group probably has a function to play here. What we want to do is add to what they do rather than do their job. So it's a case of whether we're directing the SPG to do a particular piece of work or giving some influence or request. So it's simply a case of fitting what the strategic planning group does in this space, so that we can then decide whether that's adequate as a board or we'd like to see more. Then that Martin's point becomes valid. Then what is that more and how would we do that? So let's just hang on to that as we go forward. I've been looking for the strategic planning group through Andrina's leadership with their plan to take these thoughts on board and to think about how we can better refine or improve on the outcome template and framework. And in doing that, I might just offer as well that we're having a side discussion, myself, the Vice Chair, the Chief Officer, the Chair of Audit, and I think the Vice Chair of Audit, who may not be available, but we're having a side discussion about performance in general and how we might be able to look to improve that in the next year or two. What actions could we take? And thought had fallen on the Audit Committee and what role they could perform as an additional level of assurance around performance and what that might look like. So just to give you and others a bit of assurance that we're not lost in that. We are looking to try and improve the whole performance thing. Out of this plan, because I've read it too, there is obviously this option to take a report every 6 months. Councillor McCluskey is saying maybe a bit more often than that. There's probably a happy medium somewhere. We have six meetings a year. We clearly don't want to see the update every couple of months. It's like watching a snail race. So there will be a happy medium to be had somewhere between twice a year and maybe three or four times a year. Again, open for discussion, and we can always change that. The first time we see a report, we want more frequency. We simply have to ask for that, and obviously that will happen. So I'm going to leave that there. I would like to bring Charlene in, who's been waiting for a long time, and then I'll go to Kate, and we'll wrap this up and have a break. Charlene.
Thanks, Chair. I'll keep this brief. It's really more of a comment than a question, because as Andrina said, CBS were pleased to support the engagement on the transition strategic plan. It's around emerging key priority 1.5 that the third sector are ready to bid for contracts with HSCP. Work was completed on this, so I agree that the status is blue completed to some extent, because that work was actually undertaken during the post-COVID recovery period, and we did actually find it quite difficult to engage with some organisations because they were struggling to recover from COVID. I think it's important, just looking forward to next year and the new strategic plan, that we don't lose sight of the fact that this work needs to continue in partnership, and although it is complete, it's an ongoing piece of work because there are many organisations who we would recognise still need that support from ourselves and colleagues at the HSCP. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlene. Kate, the last word on this topic. Chief
So
Officer.
I'm very clear that the service itself has to do a bit of work before we determine how regular that we would advise the IGB where we think this should be taken. First of all, we don't have any data as such, and we should be at least trying to benchmark it against our previous year's data if we can. Prior to the pandemic, because that's as normal as we're going to get, because the 3 years of the pandemic or 2 years won't tell us anything. And then from that, I'd be keen as the Chief Officer to identify the areas that I think that there needs to be improvement. And that's the areas that we need to focus on, as opposed to, because as people have highlighted, these are inputs and processes. And unless we look at the inputs, so we know straight away the number of linked workers applications has got a direct reflection on our community mental health teams. Okay, but we need to understand, is that going up or is it going down first of all? So we need to do our own work in-house before we can actually kind of come to you and tell you the areas that we are significantly worried about.
Thanks, Kate. I mean, a useful discussion really around our conclusion of our strategic plan. Thanks, Andrina, for leading the day-to-day work in this and for bringing it to conclusion. I'm conscious that the minute we go nap in this, you start on next year's work probably quite soon. I do think you start with a reasonably good framework and a reasonably good set of processes. But as you've heard from colleagues, there are areas that we're looking to, I guess, to see a bit of improvement or movement in a particular direction. So hopefully those have been useful to your future work. Let me just ask colleagues then, before I do that, I have got a question. I knew there was a question I had. It's really to the Chief Officer, and it's not one that we need to agonise around, but I know when we took this to the Health Board, they asked us to go away and do a bit of work on outcomes. My question is, do they still need to see the final version? We don't need to answer that today, but that's one for the Chief Officer maybe to run to ground with the Health Board. Does this need to go back to the FPP for noting? It's not for approval, but it does, okay. So that's maybe something we can reflect in the minutes. Thank you for that. So with that in mind, helpful discussion on the strategic plan.
Chair, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but David Gould and Robert Moran have both had their hands raised for a while now.
I've not seen that. Let me backtrack. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to use chat and I've missed their hands. Let me go to David Gould and I'll leave the Vice Chair to last. David.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. So sorry.
No, not a problem at all. The joys of technology, Chair. Couple of points. Again, I'll echo what my colleagues have said. I share the sentiments in terms of there's a real fantastic amount of work has gone into this, very focused. So I'm very impressed by this paper, I have to say. A couple of minor detail points. I think in terms of measuring progress, the comment I would make is that in order to ensure that we make sure that measured outcomes and objectives are aligned, we actually need to have the right outcomes in the first place. When I was looking through the big actions, particularly number 2, I started thinking about young carers under 16 and how we support them. I know that's a particular area of interest for me. Young carers under 16 do not get necessarily the same financial support that over 16s get. There's no measurement on them, but there is mention of it in the key deliverables and activities. So my comment would be that if we are going to look at these as key deliverables, we need to make sure that there's a measure of progress. Otherwise, my concern would be that they fall at the side. They don't get the same level of attention that you perhaps expect them to get. The other point I would make is in terms of the indicators, when you've got the MSG indicators, the LGBF indicators, the national integration indicators, and then the 44 measures for the big actions. Now, when I was looking through the document, I kept coming back to the same question of, if we have the national indicators, the MSG and LGBF, should they not also be incorporated into the 6 big actions? Because at the moment, it feels like here's the big action document and here's all the other stuff we're going to do on top. It doesn't necessarily feel cohesive to me. So I'd very much welcome comments and thoughts on that.
Thanks, David. So 2 points, Andrina, do you want to pick those up? So the first one was about the young carers.
I'm probably not best placed to pick up the young carers. I don't know whether Jonathan or Kate wants to pick that up. In terms of the second point, I'm more than happy to take guidance and support in terms of how best we can lay this out. You're absolutely right. in terms of there's some of the indicators that are in the LGBF are actually the same that are the national integration indicators, and there's a bit of overlap. I think what I was trying to do was just show the entirety of what's out there that we currently need to report against. But we can absolutely look at, in terms of the way that we develop the scorecard, is to make that a bit more coherent and cohesive and pull that together. I'm more than happy to have a look at that.
Thanks, Andrea.
David, thanks for that contribution. I would like to just go to Kate around the young carers point that you made. Maybe Kate can help us with that. Kate. Or Jonathan. I'm not hearing anything from Kate.
That's because I never put on the mic. Sorry, Chair. I'll save Jonathan because he's newer than me, so he's still trying to find things out. We commissioned Bernardo's to do that, so we're actually in the process of re-looking at what that will look like and where that ties in with our offer for children with who have additional support needs too, in its widest sense. In some areas, it is actually delivered by education and the carer centre. So because actually HSCP, it's too late when these children come to our attention. They're identified in universal services before they're identified in a targeted service. So we're going to be doing a bit of work around that. That's my point about getting the data in the first instance to see what we've actually got, because we can't make everything a priority. We need to make the things a priority that we want the greatest impact, and we haven't got the data to support that level of prioritisation within health and social care partnership. So that's one of our key priorities moving forward.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to give the last word to the Vice Chair, Robert.
Aye, thank you, Alan. It's just it's good to have a strategic plan, you know, but sometimes we could be held hostage to these things. And I'm just talking the big action, you know, number 5, where we do work with partners in ADP, and we rely on all our partners to get our outcomes. So I'm just big action number 5.
Sure, did you have a specific point, Robert? I can
yes, I will. See the ADP, we rely on all our outcomes with the partners on the ADP. And I'm talking about Police Scotland and other bodies like that. Now, if there is a real influence of bad drugs become available on the street, we can find that a lot of the people that we're dealing with end up taking them and become ill and even die. And that looks at a bad reflection of the work we're trying to do. So what I try to emphasise here is that we really do need to apply on our partners and a lot of the things we do to get the outcomes that we're looking for. I don't think we could do it all on our own. And although the strategies are good, I think unless we get the rest of the partners to work along beside us, we really struggle to get all the outcomes we're looking for.
No, I mean, it's always helpful to be reminded of that. I mean, it does apply in almost every area that we work in, is that we have to rely on partners in a whole variety of areas to drive change in poverty or abuse of substances and stuff like that. It's a point well reminded. I noticed that Big Action 5 does start with Say Together, which I would take to mean that we can't do this alone, that we have to be working closely with the other partners in this area, which ADP is obviously on. But thanks for reminding us of that. So let me draw this to a close. I'm conscious we have a short break. So a good discussion on the strategic plan. I did start a summary earlier. I won't go back through that again. Are we content, therefore, to note and approve those recommendations at, there'll be at paragraph 2.1. There are 5 recommendation notes and approvals there at 2.1. I suspect we are. Mindful that we're going to come back to a new plan probably at this time next year for the next 5 years. So thank you for that. So with that in mind, we've got 2 substantive issues and a few other issues yet to go. It's now nearly 3:45, if I make it 42 minutes past. Let's come back at 10 to 4, which is about 7 or 8 minutes of a break. If I could ask you all to come back at 10 to 4, and I'll do my best with your help to try and dovetail us into a finish at 4:30. We have got 2 substantive items yet to go, but I think we're due a break. Thank you. Take 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah. Okay, thanks, folks. I'm sure we needed that. That's been quite helpful just to get a leg stretch. So we're moving on. We're, I guess, coming towards the end of the agenda, but two significant issues. So the next item is item 8, was 7, now 8, which is a report on our compliance with the equalities duties set out in the Equalities Act. I'll maybe just say to the board that I and Robert and the chair of the audit committee and would have been the vice chair of the audit committee not available, but the three of us sat down with officers about 10 days ago to go through this before the board, just to gain ourselves a wider understanding of what has gone on here, what has happened, and how we've gotten to this point. So I just want to offer the board that early assurance that we had a wider discussion, sort of board level leaders, if you like. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kate, perhaps for some context, and she may well hand over to officers to pick it up from there. But let's go to Kate. Hopefully she's there.
Yes, I am here, sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to say too much about this. Obviously, this has highlighted some internal issues within our own governance, internal governance processes, which I intend to address in terms of a post that will help us move forward and ensure that this situation doesn't happen. I do understand that this is a context that has been going on for some years nationally within the health and social care partnerships, because the duty at the outset of them becoming an organisation was set upon them by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, as the Council and the NHS already report. I believe that it is a challenge across the board nationally, and that each of the HSEPs are at different levels of compliance, but certainly it's not an excuse, and we are using it as a test case to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Nevertheless, we have done a lot of work to try and remediate some of the challenges that we're facing within that report. So I'm not going to say too much, and I'm just going to pass it over to Craig, who wants to take that forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Craig.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much, Alan. I suppose I just wanted to add to that by saying we want to just stress that we've had a number of discussions, and this seems to be the status across most IJBs that the case. It's not an excuse by any means, but it's just setting the context behind it. And we have started putting, and we're aware that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission have started putting pressure on IJBs to be compliant now that we have moved out of the kind of what you would say the post-COVID side of things around this particular issue. This is not something we've taken lightly, and we're in regular dialogue with the Equalities Commission as recently as last week, and we are due to have another discussion with them this end of this week as well. We have submitted our recovery plan as per Appendix 1, where we'll be fully compliant by the end of next financial year in all our areas. We're currently, as Kate says, we're currently recruiting to a new post, which will help us take this forward in conjunction with senior management as well. We are looking also to work on an interim plan which will make us compliant for 23-24, and this has been a request from the Equalities Commission in our dialogue with them last week, so we're more than happy to do that. On this basis, we're going to bring forward, I think it's to our next IJB, our position for the 23-24 as an interim basis on some of the equality data that we already have. In the meantime, we have already started our compliance work, and this can be evidenced with the EQIAs, which we now have in place for pretty much most of all our reports that we're putting forward where relevant, and that's available now. Along with the other senior management, we're confident that we now have a plan in place to move this forward, and we'll make sure this will be implemented as required. Obviously, we're happy to take any questions anybody may has.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks, Craig. I'm looking to colleagues for questions at this stage. I see Christina's already got her hand up, and then Elizabeth. So if I start with Christina.
Thank you. Can I say this isn't the first time I've come across this in organisations, that equalities work has been forgotten about or gone to the wall. It's not at all unusual. In the additional paperwork that was sent out, I think one of the emails, if I read it correctly, said that the first time this was mentioned, or at least the first time we were aware it was mentioned, was in June 2020 with an email from Lynn Walsh. Now, if you were elected to that in 2020, I understand that's the middle of COVID and nobody could reasonably have expected you to have done anything in the middle of COVID. But that was a big, important issue you were alerted to, and I would have thought we should have at least have been alerted to it previously. Secondly, I wondered if, although it doesn't specifically say this, when staff begin work or staff who are working presently, do they undergo any equality and diversity training? Obviously, the officer who's going to be doing the impact assessments is going to undergo specific training and they'll be qualified. But what about the staff in general? Do they get equality? Do they get any kind of equality training? The equalities officer that you're employing, I think had the word planning or something attached to it. Is that person, their duty is going to be equalities, diversity, getting this up to speed and continuing to ensure that it's up to speed, or are they actually going to be doing other duties as well? And one of the things I feel when I read some of the assessments at the back of these papers, it's issues impact on equalities, not just if it's a major policy change and not just if it's a new policy. It's disingenuous to say that that's the only stuff that applies to equalities. Sometimes if there are relatively minor points, it can have a big impact on a particular group. Quite often that particular group is women, but it's not always them. But small changes can make a big difference to a small section of the population.
Thanks, Christina. So a lot there. The first question was about how we become alerted to this. I mean, Christina gave us some examples of 2020. I'm not aware of that, but I know that that some of the subsequent letters that were sent out just kind of showed that we knew about this from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission back in the summer of last year. So maybe just some idea of how it's taken so long to come to the IJB. And I'll go to Kate first, and she may want to apportion it elsewhere once you said Kate.
So it came in the June 2023, and I think that there was some measure of activity, and I see Alan's got his hand up, so it might best, this predates me coming into post.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly we have, even myself, I have to kind of put my hands up. We should have brought it to the alert to the chair of the IJB much earlier when it came to my attention, which was probably now about 8 weeks ago, but I'll let Alan come in here.
Sure, Alan. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, you're right. On reflection, the email came in June, just when I come back from annual leave, and obviously as soon as I seen that, I'd alerted a couple of colleagues, but I'd asked one of my heads of service at the time, because I was interim chief officer, obviously, to go away and engage with the commission. They'd set up workshops and stuff. So although we engaged with that process to try and understand it, what I should have done as a chief officer was brought that to the chair, because that's the only thing I think I should have been a wee bit laxed on that. So in terms of learning, that's my learning from that kind of episode. It certainly, whenever we got that letter, it did stand out. It came as a wee bit of a shock, just in terms of how far back they were obviously saying we hadn't been compliant. So we got into that engagement with the Equalities Commission. They'd set up workshops, and we attended these workshops with a number of other partnerships. So, but as I said, you always take these opportunities to try and see what you can learn from that, and I think it's fair enough. I think we need to be really honest and upfront about that, to say there are maybe a couple of actions we could have taken to bring that to people's attention, but we were pretty consumed to try to understand the problem and try to find out what we need to do to fix it. So that's the kind of context to it. And beforehand, Christina, going back to the pandemic, there is absolutely no way that would have raised its head to any degree for us, because we were so busy trying to keep people safe, actually keep folk alive at first. And our whole thoughts at that time during that first year was really about trying to keep the show on the road. So I'm not surprised it it kind of didn't make it on the radar at that point, but when it did come in last summer, we kind of kicked into action to try and understand what was going on, but we should have also, along with that, alerted people as well. So that's the biggest learning from last summer, I would say.
Yeah, helpful to hear that candour, Alan. I think Andrina might want to contribute to this particular point, so I'll go to Andrina now. There are some points that Christine had raised as well. I'll come back to those. Andrina.
It's not on this particular point, it's actually on the planning officer point that
Okay,
Christina raised.
Hold that thought. I'll come back to hold that thought. So the next point that Christina raised was about the staff training. Of course, the staff are employed by the local authority or the health board. My gut feeling is that I know the health board well. I know that staff get equalities training as part of their induction, and I think there's a periodic 1, 2 or 3 year refresh, but I'm not the expert. But the second point, maybe I'll just ask Kate again to give some thought to answer, and then maybe Alan's got his hand up, but how the staff get, the question was, do the staff get equalities and diversity training, to what degree? I see Alan's got his hand up. Let's go to Alan. Alan.
Sorry, Chair, I let Kate when my hand was stuck. I couldn't get my hand down, but certainly in terms of the range of qualified staff, there is equalities training. We have a training board which would set back up again, but before the training board, there's still opportunities for people to receive and take part in equalities training. As Christina says, even small impacts of that are important for staff across the board to understand the kind of impact that has on people. So any professional qualified staff particularly will have access to ongoing training, and one of those parts of that, one aspect of that training is equalities training. So there is opportunities out there. I think though, to be honest, we're coming out of the pandemic now, and obviously there's far more opportunities as providers start to come on board and we start developing our training plan to look at equalities. So in terms of my role currently as the Chief Social Work Officer, that will be certainly discussed further in the training board in relation to some of our priorities moving forward as we're kind of coming out of the pandemic now. We're getting a chance to open up these training opportunities for people more widely again, because the kind of level of training and opportunities for training has been quite restricted.
I think what the report will tell us, it'll just make us double down in ensuring that our staff have had the appropriate training at the appropriate time, and where there's a cycle of training where you have to refresh. I'm hopeful, and obviously we'll hold you to account for this at some point, but we'll focus on that and making sure that staff have got that level of understanding of the issue. I'm going to go to Andrina because she's going to get to the point about the equalities officer and whether it's
and also. Yep, thanks, Chair. I can also mention in terms of the training, there is e-learning modules as part of induction, both on the NHS and the council side. However, that's about the very kind of basic awareness, and actually I think there's we really need to make sure a number of our staff have a much fuller understanding of that, so that you'll see that within the improvement plan. So I've now taken over responsibility for the equalities work. It's in previous posts, so those of you that have been around Inverclyde for a while may remember that I had this in a previous remit going back 5-7 years. Also, the time that I was in the council, I had the remit for the council's responsibility for equality, so I do feel I've got a fairly good background in this, and I feel confident, and obviously I'll hopefully show that to the board, that with SMT we will move the improvement plan on, and we will become compliant. In terms of the planning officer post that Christina mentioned, yes, that post has just been advertised. We have advertised it as a planning officer with a main focus at the moment around equalities, the way that we have advertised previous planning posts with a focus around community engagement, etc., really to make sure that we've got that focus at the moment to drive forward the work as part of my team. However, that post will, once we feel we're kind of progressing with some of the equalities work, they will help support some of the wider planning work that we need to do within the HSCP. Just for the IJB to note, we are interviewing tomorrow for that post.
Thanks, Andrina. That's all very helpful. Thank you. I want to move on. So, councillors, I'm going to Councillor Quinn first out of order because she has another question. I'll come back to Elizabeth Robertson. Councillor Quinn, and then I'll come back to Liz Robertson. Lynn.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Obviously, yeah, seeing this report and getting the other information, it was quite worrying. You know, when we receive those things, but I think we've well, we are where we are, and I think having that action plan in place is a positive thing. So I've probably just I've got one note of the point in the minute, which I think is a typo. So under 4.5, which is page 5, it says correspondence in June 22 and December 23. So I think that should be December 22, unless I've missed a year somewhere. Yeah, so probably my question around this is, do we know if the HSCP and the health board have got their measures in place and they're fully compliant? I suppose that gives us some reassurance that some of the activity in terms of their areas are fully covered.
Did you mean the local authority and the health board, Lynn? You said the HSCP.
Yeah, the council
yeah,
and
council,
the health board.
yeah, absolutely.
HSCP employs under the council.
Absolutely, okay, yeah, indeed, yeah. Who wanted to pick that up?
I'm happy to pick it up, Chair.
Sure.
So the council just sent off an approved their plan just last month, Lynn, and my understanding is that they are compliant, but we can get that double checked. And my understanding the health board is too.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Lynn, thanks for that comment. Did you want to come back at all?
No, I think that just gives us some level of assurance the best we can, and I look forward to seeing the actions in the plan. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Liz Robertson. Liz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just want to check up on a little proposed remedial action that I had mentioned at the side meeting that Alan referred to earlier on, where I had kind of suggested that if we have got external reporting obligations to, for example, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, that we put those onto a rolling action list so that we know that at such and such a point in the year, that's the time when that report has to be submitted. And I'm sure there's probably 2 or 3 other externally required reports that could fit into that same category. It would, one, act as an aid memoir to know when it's happening in the year, and would then move on to the bottom of the list when we get to that point in the year. But it would also give us assurance that it's all been covered without having to take it all for granted.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That was she's absolutely right. That was a discussion we had when we met with officers. Can I just ask the Chief Officer to reflect on that, and if she thinks that's something that she can maybe include in the rolling action list, which seems an obvious place to put it, just put it down at the bottom of the list as a template or something like that. Kate?
I think it's entirely sensible because it did highlight our internal governance resource, and it is a resource issue for us, to be fair. And this is not one, there's one of many reports that we have strategy plans that we have to submit, our strategic plan being one, but also there's a range of plans. So I think that would be really helpful. It might well be helpful in the rolling action log for the plans to be put in and which ones are, and for us to identify which ones are actually statutory plans so that the IGB knows about the impact. Because some of the plans that we do have to present aren't statutory. So we'll do that level of prioritisation.
Thanks, that looks helpful. I mean, we'll look to see that as we develop that out of the rolling action list and the IJBs to come. So thank you for that. Moving quickly on, I want to keep us to time. Charlene, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Really, just a quick comment to offer support to colleagues in terms of that equalities group. The third sector would be really keen to input to that in terms of bringing people to the table with lived experience and the experience that those organisations have in terms of equalities training, policy decisions, and so forth. So if we can help to facilitate any conversations, please do get in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. I have just 2 wrap-up points. One is really for the minute, I think. I noticed in the recommendations to this paper, the intent is to bring back an update in the September IJB. So maybe for the benefit of the minute and for Denise, we'll just make sure that that's captured. And of course, that then needs to feed itself back to the rolling action list that we talked about earlier that we're trying to polish up. So that action now appears in the box for September when we're coming up. So it's a little bit of a linking there. I just don't want to miss that and it falls off as an action. So we want to make sure that action flows back to the rolling action list and appears in September. The last question I've got is really for the Chief Officer. It's really just to look for assurance that she's got now the resources and the process that she thinks is going to be effective to drive us forward. I got the sense that you did, but I just wanted to get that on record. I know you're looking to appoint a new individual, and we've got a plan and a template, a framework there which the Commission has accepted, and I think they've given us the next 12 months to come into full compliance. So it's really just to give Kate the last word on this, that she's now content with, that she's got the resources and she sees the process in front of her to get us back to where we need to be. Kate?
We do, and I think that more importantly that there has been learning across the HSCP, and I think that as a result of that, I think it's very, very acute around the improvement that we need to make. So I'm reassured.
Thank you. So with that and the discussion we've had, the points that we've made, can I just ask members that they're content with the recommendations that appear at 2.1 on this item, which is about our compliance with equality duty? I guess we're content with the recommendations at 2.1. Thanks very much. That moves us on nicely to the last substantive report, not to diminish the ones that are coming after, but the last big report, which is about our budget for 23-24. I'm going to hand over, I think, directly to Craig, because I think most of the work will be for Craig. Kate and I have had a good discussion with this with Craig. We've also had, and I want to thank them, the Short Life Working Group, or the working group that produced the scrutiny on the proposals that we brought forward this year. I thought that was a wise thing to have done back in the autumn. I'm grateful to those that contributed to that. We then, through the Chief Officer and the Chief Financial Officer, we had a development day to flesh out what officers were thinking about how we might balance our budget this year, mindful, and I sit in another IJB with huge challenge, mindful that all public sector organisations are under some form of financial challenge. So without going any further than that, we've had a reasonable level of scrutiny up to this point as to what the likely proposals are to allow us to form a balanced budget from 1 April onwards. I'm going to hand over to Craig now just to contextualise that in the way he wants, then we'll take any questions and then move to approval if we need to. So Craig.
Thank you very much, Alan, for that. Before I start, I just wanted to say a couple of big thank yous here, because obviously this has been a substantial piece of work, as everybody knows. First of all, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Marie, who's my finance manager, who works hand in hand with me in doing this side of things. Big thank you to our SMT. Also, a big thank you to our budget group, which we had, and just the larger team that we have in total that's gotten us to this position, when we know that the significant challenges that exist out there at the moment. So moving on, following on from our development session a few weeks ago, I can now present with you with our budget for 23-24. This is our budget based upon the offer, or based on the settlements provided by both the Health Board and the Council. Don't plan to go in detail into the paper, as we've covered most of it as part of our development session. The main areas I want to highlight are, first of all, number one, the proposed savings adjustments put forward in section 4.6. Should be noted that these adjustments have little effect on service delivery, no redundancies and no increase in charges to our service users. I point out not many IJBs are in that position at this moment in time. Second of all, the use of temporary reserves and general reserves to close the funding gap of £600,000. This will allow officers and the budget group time to work on further savings into the new financial year, and will bring them forward as accordingly. Approve the reserve proposals identified in section 6.2. We are requesting transfers to target our main challenges and our risks in 23-24. An update of our reserve strategy will come forward to the IJB in June. I issued this morning, and apologies for it being late, just a wee bit of context behind the budgets that we were going to do in a table form to try and make it a wee bit cleaner and easier for everybody to see that. I want to mention that in the recommendation at point 5, why the figures are slightly different to the anticipated funding given to us from both Inverclyde Council and the Health Board. That's because we've added on resource transfer onto that, and it's in and out. So it was a conversation I actually had with Simon on Friday that just wanted to highlight that's everything's okay with that side of things. Also want to highlight, and we're looking to approve the draft 5-year plan at section 6. We will bring forward a further report on this in June, which will give a lot more of the detail behind it, but this is a high-level 5-year plan of where we see things for that time period. That's the indication of the funding challenges we face going forward. And finally, we're asking for the approval of the transfer of the core budget to the Specialist Children's Hosted Services, as Jonathan mentioned earlier on in his paper. So do appreciate there's an awful lot in these papers, but we've had an awful lot of discussion already on it, and it focused on a development session we have. So more than happy to take any questions or comments anybody has on this budget.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Kate. Board members, opportunity for questions at this stage. I'm mindful we've had a development session and we've had, as I say, the scrutiny group look at some of these issues to, I guess, to test them against what the options might be. But this is the time we really need to scrutinise this and formally approve it if that's what we're going to do. So I've got a question from Simon Carr. Simon.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Craig and his team for pulling all this together. It's tricky to get it all together in the one place as coherent as this. I've got a techie question about point 4. I think it's point 4 of the recommendations, where it says authorise the Chief Officer delegated authority to accept the formal funding offer. My understanding is that it's not an offer of funding, it's an allocation, yeah? And on that basis, the board or the Chief Officer has no legal right or right under the integration scheme to challenge the funding. Now, we can have discussions about it, but from a formal point of view, we can't accept the offer because it's an allocation. So there's that point of clarification, because if that's not the if what I've just said is not the case, then the IJB have perhaps different routes to go down, Kate. Yeah. I was looking at you there.
No. Sorry, who? So if Craig doesn't want to tackle this, I can, because I knew this would come up, and I've obviously a reasonable understanding of the integration scheme. So I'm happy to punt at this, Craig, if you want me to take this on as the chair.
I'm happy, Alan, if you want.
Thought you might say that. So if we go back and look at the integration scheme, I recognise you don't have it today, but you can always go back after supper and look tonight. If you go to 8.8 in the integration scheme, it talks about budget management. I'll just tell you what it says there, and why Simon has asked that, and how we make effects here, how we correct this. It makes it quite clear. I'll just read as it says. It says the IJB will direct the resources it receives from the parties. It receives from the parties. It doesn't give us an option of not receiving it. You can push it all back, I suspect, but basically it says the IJB will direct the resources it receives from the parties in line with the plan, and in so doing, it will seek to ensure that the planned activity can reasonably met from the available resources when viewed as a whole, and achieve a year-end balance. So what that's telling me as the chair is that the opportunity we have here is to receive that money and then provide an apportionment of how it should be spent downstream. We clearly would not at any point say we're not going to take the budget and we're going to then suspend activity on health and social care delivery in Inverclyde. We may choose to fight battles after that, but the integration scheme makes it quite clear that our duty is to receive the budget, whether we like it or not. And then, yeah, that's what it says in the integration scheme at 8.8. I wasn't sure that Craig might have that to hand, so I brought it to the table for myself.
In which case, Chair, point 4 is moot, because we have no right to accept or reject the offer. We simply note the offer.
I wonder if it would help us, rather than spend hours on this. It is an important point, but I wonder if it would help us if we change the term accept to receive. You're absolutely right to raise the issue, but we're authorising the to receive, which is consistent then with the language in the integration scheme. Does that help you with the question?
Well, my question is not directly related to that, but it does change the position of the IJB. If we're simply accepting what we're giving, and we don't have any right to challenge it or to reject it, yeah, then it makes things an awful lot easier. Yeah, my point is not necessarily about 23-24. The difficulties will start to emerge, yeah, in 24-25 and for the 3 or 4 years thereafter, yeah, because if we look at Appendix 6, yeah, and Craig did send out a complementary reserve statement earlier. If we look at number 6, Appendix 6, yeah, we're estimating a cumulative financial gap, yeah, by 27-28, yeah, of 6.4 million. Yeah. Now the important thing, certainly from my point of view, to note about that, Alan, yeah, is that that does not include any demographic challenges. Yeah? So the challenges posed by the changing nature of the population, COVID, yeah, mental health issues, are not included in that 6.4. Yeah? And therefore, on that basis, yeah, well, obviously, we need to look forward to Craig providing that. I think they said June or May, yeah, the further statement in terms of the demographic pressures, yeah. But I suppose I'm bringing it to members' attention if they haven't already done so. That becomes critical, yeah. So I suppose in saying that, yeah, my disappointment is that the council haven't passed through. I mean, they're entirely, you know, as we discussed at point 4, yeah, the council are entirely in their rights to do this, yeah. But I would hope that the discussions between the chief officer and the chief executive, yeah, acknowledge those difficulties we're going to face from 24 all the way through to 28, yeah. So I suppose that's the point, Chair, yeah, is the figures are currently understated, yeah, and that we're going to need very, very close coordination with the chief executive of the council, yeah, as we move through this. And that was the point. I took a while to get there, but I think I got there in the end, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to go back to Craig, maybe to talk about the 4-year challenge, which is part of the report. But you're right to acknowledge that in the 4 or 5 year period, we are looking at a 6.5 million challenge as we look at it today. These are unlikely, they're unlikely to get less, but of course we don't know what our funding is for those 4 or 5 years. We can always make the assumption that it's diminishing, but that may not be right. So we've always tended to look to the next 12 months. I suspect we've had an annuality about these things. My recollection without digging it out, I think our 1 year challenge is 1.8 million next year. That's not wildly unachievable at this stage, but you're right to highlight the challenge over the 5 years, Simon. I will go to Craig to see if he wants to say anything about that. It's part of the discussion we need to have. Craig.
Yep. Happy to come in on that point. Yeah, the 5-year position is obviously, it's quite a difficult position all round. But I think the key at this moment in time is we do not know if there is any additional funding that's coming forward. So I've got to start a baseline position of there not being additional funding. So I'm showing what you would say, taking into account Simon's comment as well, we do need to add demographics into it, and we'll add that into the plan, which is going to come in June time. So that will show the worst case scenario, but I just at this moment in time wanted to show what I perceive as the worst case scenario for us at the moment, without additional funding or savings coming our way. And the point I've been trying to make here, just with the 5-year plan, is just to give alert the board that we will need to make difficult decisions going forward if we do not receive additional funding, and that allows officers to then go and work on about how those difficult decisions will be taken forward, and allow us to start that work.
Thanks, Craig. I'm going to go to Councillor McCluskey. Let me go back to Simon. Actually, made a number of points here. I'm not sure we covered them all. Simon, last word. Did we cover?
No last word, really, except.
Did we cover the points? I guess is what I'm saying. You did make a point about the chief officer and the chief executive having a frank discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important that the council and the IJB work closely together, yeah, so that we're all aware of the challenges we're going to face. Yeah, but my kind of general point is now is not the time for us to be de-investing in health and social care. There's massive challenges ahead, some of which we know about, some of which we haven't identified or quantified yet. So
yeah, I don't think anybody on the call would disagree with that. I'd be surprised.
I'm sure. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor McCluskey.
Thanks, Alan. I think just at the outset, just to say thank you to Craig and to Kate and everyone else who's been involved in the detail of dealing with this. None of these budget processes are easy, and this one isn't easy. But I think in comparison to some of the conversations that we've been having in local government, this one certainly doesn't feel quite as painful as some of the choices that we've been asked to make in the last few weeks. And I think the couple of things I'd just like to highlight in this is, just to reinforce what Craig said, is we're doing this with no increase in charges, which I think is a really important signal about prioritising people's incomes at a time of challenging cost of living crisis, and also no compulsory redundancies, which I think is also really important. And I think kind of looking ahead, to take kind of Simon's point head on, the next 5 years are really challenging. And not only is it challenging in terms of the numbers that Craig's laid out in the note, but it's also challenging because we have little to no idea what we're really heading into in terms of the National Care Service and the framework that will sit around health and social care over the next period of time. And I think that makes it even more difficult. So I've been asked to deal with challenging budget situations at the same time as we're being asked to basically, we're working on incredibly imperfect information, and the National Care Service seems to be going in all sorts of different directions depending on which First Minister leadership candidate you look at on any given day. So who knows where we're going to be by this time next week. But just on the point Simon raised about the relationship between the IGB and the council, I think we need to also take one, I know why we're focused on the health board and the council because they are the integration partners, but I think we need to take one step back from this, which is, we are ending up in this situation. It's not the council's fault. It's the fault of a Scottish government that's systematically undermined local government over the past 15 years. And that might sound like a political point, but I think it's something that's even now accepted by members of the government itself, if we listen to what's been said over the last 4 weeks. And I think that unless we have a more grown-up attitude between the government and local government, we are going to be facing some really difficult conversations over the next few years. And I totally agree with what Simon said at this point in time about investing in health and social care. And that, when you look at our council's budget, that is what we're doing. But it's basically meaning in other parts of the budget, we are having to slash services and cut really deep in areas that are going to have a direct impact on people. And so, at the root of all this is a insufficient level of funding from the government to fund all the services that local government produce, or all the services that local government provide, which is then flowing through into problems in our budget. So, as much as we obviously need to be contained in terms of this board and the relationship between the council and the health board, I think I would just sort of urge everyone to kind of take a step back and think about this in the broader terms, which is, it doesn't benefit anyone to have a fight between the health side and the local government side. I think what benefits everyone is to try and increase the share of the pie that's going to public services as a whole, or else we're going to constantly be in these kind of reductive arguments about who gets what, and that's really not, I don't think that's going to serve anyone who relies on the service as well. So it's just to make that point. But in terms of the budget, I think we're obviously going to have difficult conversations over the next few years, but I think this budget, what we've done this year, sets a good balance in order to deliver for the people that we're here to deliver for. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I'm just reminding members that what we're here to do is to set the budget, along the lines that Craig and the office are proposing. And consequential to that would be discussions that others could have with leaders in other places about the consequences of their actions. It's something we've talked about offline. It's that we don't need to do it today, but our principal responsibility for the people of Inverclyde is to set a budget. Simon brings to light the challenge in future years. He's absolutely right. Martin brings to light the challenge of the politics of this and how funding has flowed between central government and various parts of communities. That's not an issue for us. We just got to set the budget today. So with that in mind, I'm going to go to Christina, who's got a point, and then if there are no other questions, we'll try to draw this through because it's now 4:20. Christina.
Yes, briefly. Thanks for all the work you and your team have done, Craig. Can I just ask, what basis of inflation, what percentage of inflation did you envisage whenever you drew up the budget? As I see they're talking about a 2% increase in funding. Currently inflation, I can't remember, it's something about 9 or 10%, and it's predicted to fall way down into single figures by December. So what did you envisage as the inflation rate whenever you put your budget forward?
Okay, I suppose the easy answer to that is it depends on what budget line you're looking at, because there's various different ones. In terms of the pay, we went on the basis of the 3% from the council side, and anticipation that anything above and beyond that is funded from Scottish Government, which has been what all the other IJBs have been doing. In the health side, on the pay side of things, we've done it on 2% on the basis, again, that that's what the funding has been, and beyond that we'll get the funding from Scottish Government. Regarding general inflation, we've put in 4% on the number of our providers, which is in line with what other IJBs are doing. On the National Care Home contract, we've done 6%, which is on the basis of what all our other IJBs and the discussions we've had with all the other chief financial officers. So I suppose I'm just kind of highlighting there to give you a wee bit of reassurance that we've tried to cover all the main grounds that we've got, and they're all the big hidden items for us.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is to draw stumps here. There's one issue I think which remains, which I just need your thoughts and agreement on. So as I read the integration scheme, and I'll just say this again for the benefit of all, the responsibility here is to the IJB to direct the resources it receives from the parties. This gets to Simon's point about number 4, which we must resolve before we accept this item. I'm proposing that item 4 is actually deleted, so subpoint 2.1.4, which is authorising the Chief Officer Delegate to accept the formal funding. I think that's covered already by the points above. We've noted the funding from the council, we've noted the funding from the Health Board, and we've noted the size of the set aside. Those for me deliver the size of the budget that we need then for our officers to set the budget. So I'm just looking for you to concur with me that we can delete 2.1.4 because we don't need to have that in, because by implication, as Simon says, we would perhaps on some years we may not accept the budget. The integration scheme is very clear, as I understand it, is that we're there to receive the budget from the parties and grumble about it at another place. So with that in mind, I'll pause for a second to see if anybody wants to come back to me, mindful that time has rolled on. I'm not seeing a hand and I'm not seeing a dot. So with that in mind, for the benefit of the minute, I'll just say to Diana that we do need to just make sure that when we that in the minute it's made clear that, and perhaps you and I can talk offline and give you the language that you need from the integration scheme. But we're not taking 2.1.4. We are taking all the other recommendations at this point. Can I then pause and just say to members, are we therefore now at the completion of this process this year, given the work we've put into it? Number one, thanking our officers for getting us to this point. I have heard it said to me in other places that the stewardship in Inverclyde for financial resources is very strong. That is a credit to the officers and the staff that work on this issue on our behalf. And I don't just mean at leadership level, I mean at all levels. So with that in mind, are we content therefore to note and approve the recommendations at 2.1? There are 10 of those, less we're taking number 4 out. That would make 9 of those recommendations. We are content. Thank you very much. A difficult discussion. I'm grateful for all the thoughts and the contributions you've made. We are a bit at the end of the day, but I don't think we're far off finishing. If we can move on then quickly to the update on the cost of living support that we agreed to earlier. I know that Kate's going to talk to this. It's not a complicated item, but I'll just ask Kate to pick this up. We brought this back because previously I think we talked about how we were going to govern the expenditure of these funds. Kate's produced a paper. I'll just hand it straight to the Chief Officer. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. This paper just covers where we've got to and some of the successes, because I'm just going to hand it over to Marie Cares, who has been the lead for this, and also to thank Marie for all the work that she's done here.
I'm happy to take it if that's okay.
Okay,
go ahead.
That's fine,
go
Kate.
ahead. Benefit of time. Go ahead.
I'm just conscious because I haven't spoken to Marie about taking this paper, so I'm seeing her face, so I am more than happy to do it. I've already prepared a reply to it. But Marie, you're more than welcome to come in as well. So if it's okay, Alan, I'll just get...
Please, Craig, press on.
Okay, thank you. Now, first of all, I just want to say a massive thank you again to Marie and the team. They've done a lot of work on this in a very short period of time in turning this around, and there's not underestimating that in any way, sure, at all, when the work that's been involved in this. At the last IJB, we approved the use of £430,000 worth of cost of living funding. This is an update of where we currently are. Under the Section 12 and 22 payments, we currently have spent just over £36,000. It's a slight difference to what's in the report. The report was 18,000, but obviously a few weeks have passed on since then, so I was keen to get the most up-to-date information as possible. And this has helped 163 people and families in Inverclyde. This was only going to increase in the next few weeks as we are just about to finalise our agreement with PayPoint, which will allow us to get this money out quicker to people in the coming weeks and months. We've allocated a total of 500 warm boxes during the winter, which is also mentioned in the report. We have supplemented Inverclyde Council's work around the warm hand of friendship to the value of about £50,000, which is mentioned in the report as well. We have a commitment of paying out and working with our third sector partners here on grants up to the value of £100,000. We have issued a grant to Bernardo's for payments to families to the value of £25,000. I just want to say I personally feel this has been a really good piece of work by the team over the last number of months. And just wanted to finally highlight that any leftover funds that we have, our intention is at year end is to create a further earmarked reserve, which allows us to carry that forward into the next year and allow us to keep on spending in this particular area to help out in Inverclyde and the various vulnerable people that there are there. So number of us have involved in this, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Craig. So colleagues, questions on the cost of living disbursements that we talked about previously that are now obviously feeding through to the community. Questions and any comments? I'm not seeing any hands, probably because it's late in the day. I'm really, yeah, thanks, Charlene. I'm really grateful for the work the officers have done in this on behalf of the, on behalf of the board, but obviously HSP. That's been able to get funds to the right people in the community at this sort of time of the year. Conscious that we've got underspends, we've still got, I think, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks left of the financial year. So I'm simply inviting you within the government's constraints and due diligence to do whatever you would need to do to ensure that that continues to flow. And I've no reason to doubt that colleagues won't accept the fact that if you've got a rollover, that we'll earmark that and ensure that it continues to flow in the way that you've described it in the paper. So with that in mind, I'll go to the Vice Chair, Robert.
Aye, thank you, Alan. Alan, just to say, the one hand of friendships, I went and visited one of the places within my own ward, and it was absolutely fantastic to see the difference it's made. You know, people could go there the Monday afternoon, we're sitting, you know, in a lovely environment, and there were various people who knew. Some people I'd worked with from shipyards, other people worked in the electronic industry, and it was just a fantastic thing to see them all together. And I just hope this funding does get carried forward and we can carry on through to next year, because it is making a real difference to a lot of people within the community which I represent.
Thanks, Robert. I'm just looking at your comment and the one that Charlene's made. I've maybe got a question myself then for Craig. So I think Charlene's saying the warm hand of friendship funds have now been allocated. The question would be that if there was further demand on that, do we have the flexibility to put more funds in that area? Could we use some of these funds before the end of the year, I guess, is the question. Craig.
We can certainly have a look at it, so I'm happy to have that conversation offline around it.
Okay, I see Kate's got a comment. Kate, please.
So this is a good example from the Vice Chair's comments that we should be charting outcomes here, because not only does this provide the warm hand of friendship, it reduces social isolation. So it's covering a variety of outcomes that we're sitting within our big plan. And I think that we're keen to follow up and see what the difference that getting money quickly to people at the right time makes. So it's something that we need to learn from. And certainly I'd be keen that we're just at the very beginning of it, but I'm keen to kind of look at the potential of it as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, that's also very helpful to hear that as well. I mean, it's something we shouldn't just do in 1 year. Well, I think what's demonstrated to me as the chair is the partnership between the HSCP, the IJB, and the local authority is quite strong. These are areas that we kind of overlap in. We've managed to make a real difference in a short space of time with, I think, 3 or 4 substantial programmes with with strong resources behind them. So thank you for that. I've got another comment from Charlene, and I think that was probably the comment we had earlier. So I think with that, and mindful of the time, can I ask members, are we content therefore to note the recommendations at 2.1? I guess we are. We are. Thank you very much. Bringing us quickly to conclusion then. So there was an item on the original, I think, agenda, which was Chief Officer's report. We discussed that. I discussed it with Chief Officer, and we let that run this time because we had so many other reports on, mindful that we've updated a number of things. That brings us nicely then to the closed session. So I'm just going to pause and invite members of the public and any members of the press that are still with us. Thank you for being here that long. We're going to just go into closed session because we've got 2 items to take which are in the closed session. So I'll pause, and when Vicky tells me that it's good to go, we'll move on to item